What is up, ladies and gentlemen? My name is Jericholic8704, here to introduce you to the fourth installment of the Jericholic8704 Q&A series. Here we have a special edition Q&A, the Chris Jericho Q&A. All questions are concerned with the Ayatollah of Rock and Rolla, my favorite, Chris Jericho. Now, let's dive right into the questions. First, the man that was Daniel asked, first, favorite Jericho theme song. Now, thinking about this, I really love all of Jericho's themes, to be honest. I mean, a majority of his WWE run, pretty much all of it, has been the Break the Walls Down theme song, which, is so iconic. So I have to say that's my favorite. I do enjoy all of his other theme songs, though. I will not lie and say that, all of his other theme songs are shit, because they really aren't. I really like the Saliva one, the King of the World theme song. I use that a lot in my videos. And I really also enjoy his heel theme from WCW. It was, the instrumental of One Crazed Anarchist by Pearl Jam. And even though it's a blatant rip-off of that song, I still like the guitar riff. I think it has a very comedic heel tone to it that's also somewhat serious, because that was kind of Jericho's flair in WCW during his heel run. He was a comedic heel. He had comedic gimmicks. He had the funny moments, the funny interviews, but he was a serious wrestler. It wasn't like Santino in there where he's, pulling out sock puppets and all that. He had legit offense. He had big moves. He had the Lion Tamer. That was a dangerous submission hold. So Jericho was serious, but his theme in WCW really, really complemented his character. But I will say, Break Down the Walls is my favorite theme for Jericho, just because it's so iconic, and it's just what I associate with him. 2. How would you have redone the Jericho Ambrose storyline to make it much better than how it was executed? I think a good way to do that, and it might seem like a tired angle, but I think if we had Jericho kind of revert back to more of his 2008 persona, prim and proper in a suit, he's here to bring class, to WWE. He's the everything Dean Ambrose lacks. He's the polar opposite to Dean Ambrose. Here comes crazy Dean Ambrose with his messy hair and his wife beater and beat up jeans and leather jacket, and here comes Chris Jericho. Maybe even he could even spin the persona a little bit more. Maybe Jericho's clean shaven. Maybe his hair is combed over, instead of having it spiked up. Maybe it's like a comb over or something. And he uses more sophisticated language. He cleans up his offense. He doesn't do any showboating. He's everything Dean Ambrose lacks. I think that could have been a really good storyline. Just for the base of, he wants the WWE to have someone they can be proud of. You know what I mean? They were, as we all know, Dean Ambrose is currently the WWE champion, and it's almost like he was being groomed for that. So Jericho wants. It's almost like maybe it's not out of malice. You know what I mean? Like that would also be a really good angle to take it. Like, Jericho isn't doing it because he hates Dean Ambrose. It's because he wants to make him better, but Jericho's so distorted in trying to make him better that it's almost like a heel persona, if you know what I mean. Like, he's not doing this out of hatred. He wants to see everyone rise to how great let me put it this way. In Jericho's mind, he is the pinnacle of wrestler and what everyone should aspire to be. And he's almost like a savior, you know what I mean? Kind of like Punk. Like CM Punk was a straight-edge savior. Like, he was trying to convert everyone, not out of malice, but out of just wanting to help them. This is kind of what Jericho wants to do. He kind of wants to be a savior for Dean Ambrose, but then Ambrose isn't going to have any of it. Jericho is going to try and strip away all the dignity that Ambrose has, everything that makes him Dean Ambrose, if you know what I mean? So I think that could have been a really interesting storyline, other than what they did, which was basically just, them trading barbs back and forth. Next question, which catchphrase from Jericho do you prefer? Stupid idiot or the gift of Jericho? Drink it in, man. I love the gift of Jericho. That is an awesome catchphrase. I love stupid idiot just because of how trivial and how stupid it sounds, for lack of a better word. And what I love about stupid idiot is something I could have seen myself as an 8-year-old Jericholic saying. All the insults I heard on wrestling when I was a kid, I could never get away with saying. You had The Rock calling people, sons of bitches and whooping their candy ass. I could never say that as a 7-year-old. I'd get my ass beat. You know what I mean? I couldn't have done that. But stupid idiot, I just love how accessible that is. You know what I mean? But the gift of Jericho, just his delivery. If he just said, the gift of Jericho, drink it in, man. No, it's the way he slurs everything out. The gift of Jericho. Drink it in, man. Like the way he says it is so funny, and I love everything about it. So I would definitely say gift of Jericho is by far the better catchphrase, even though Stupid Idiot is great. And question 4, who do you think is left for Jericho to feud with? To be honest, you can really stick Jericho in with anyone. What's great about Jericho is he stays over to the point where he can be a heel and he can be a babyface. And what's great about Jericho, and this is very rare with a lot of wrestlers, is when he's a face, you absolutely love him. But when he's a heel, you can absolutely hate him. Now, obviously, there's dedicated fans like me who will never hate Jericho no matter what he does. But he can feud with anyone. If he needs to be a face, Jericho can get himself over as a face. That's something that's very, very special about Chris Jericho is that he can stay over. You know what I mean? He knows the tools. He knows his audience too. He knows what his audience wants to hear. He knows what they want to hear to get them to cheer, and he knows what they want them to hear to have them boo. So Jericho can feud with pretty much anyone. That being said, I mean, he could feud with guys that we really wouldn't expect him to feud with, like maybe Big Cass. Like, remember when Jericho was supposed to face Big Cass on Raw? I totally believe that as a believable feud for Big Cass. That totally would have worked. Apollo Crews, like that could be another one. Hell, you could throw Finn Balor, maybe in Finn Balor's first pay-per-view, because, Jericho and Finn Balor are going to be on the same brand. Maybe have Finn Balor, take Jericho. That's just an option, as one of his potential feuds. I'm trying to think of more people. I mean, it all depends on when Jericho wants to retire, and a lot of factors can be thrown in, but I'll say guys like Big Cass and Apollo Crews, like, Jericho would always want to put them over, new guys. Baron Corbin, that's another one. And, Jericho can be a heel for those guys, and he can be a face for those guys. And Jericho's always willing to put people over like that. So 3 big names I'm thinking are Crews, Baron Corbin, and also Finn Balor. Throw that one in there. And Big Cass. And Enzo Amore, too, if you want to throw him in there as well. And your final question, better Jericho heel run, now or 2012? Now, this is pretty tough. I will say I enjoy Chris Jericho more in 2016 than I did in 2012. And it's kind of a toss-up because 2012, he was a better in-ring worker and he had better matches. Now, granted, Jericho really hasn't had, he's had really good matches with AJ. His match at Payback with Ambrose was pretty good in my opinion, but the cage match or the Asylum match, whatever, I thought that match wasn't all that good. Jericho, you can tell, is really slowing down in the ring. And I mean, he's like, 44, 45, you expect that. But, 2012, he was the better wrestler. But, I don't want to say there's nothing noteworthy from that 2012 run, because there certainly is. That feud he had with Punk was really, really good. But I think after that feud with Punk, what did he do? He faced Punk at Extreme Rules, and then he challenged for the world title. I think after that feud with Punk settled down, he kind of just became a guy. He had an okay feud with Dolph Ziggler. But after that, nothing really stood out. In 2016, I've always known what Jericho's doing, if that makes sense. So maybe his matches haven't been all that great. I mean, he did have great matches with Styles, but then again, Styles can have a great match with anyone. Not saying Jericho didn't, pull his load, but still. So sure, his in-ring work has declined since 2012, but I think as a character, as a wrestler, which is what I look for Jericho more now, because let's face it, I don't really look for Jericho to have 5-star classics anymore. I did when I was younger and when he was younger, but now I look to other younger wrestlers like, Zayn, Nakamura, and Kevin Owens, and all those other great wrestlers, and Seth Rollins, and all those other guys to have classic in-ring matches. Those are the guys I look for. For Jericho, I want a nostalgia trip, and I want a fun character, and I get that in 2016. So I'm going to say his better heel run was definitely in 2016. Brendan Culph asked the following question: thoughts on Jericho's religious beliefs? I don't really have a problem with it, to be honest. And unlike someone like Shawn Michaels, and I'm not trying to call out Shawn Michaels on this in any way, and I don't really hate him for it or anything, and I don't even dislike it. I mean, when Shawn Michaels came out and, he got on his knees and, looked to the heavens, you knew, he had crosses on his gear. He really was proud of his religious beliefs. Jericho, as far as I'm concerned, really hasn't done anything that would hint at his religious beliefs. He's really kept them hidden. So, I mean, he's a Christian. I'm totally fine with that. I believe he's Catholic. So, I mean, I don't really know what to say to that. I mean, it's fine. And again, I don't think he's ever gotten preachy. I don't think he's ever, done anything to the point where, like, it almost seemed like he was trying to convert people. Like, I've never heard stories like that. So, I mean, as far as religion goes, that's all I can ask for. It's like if you keep it to yourself and you respect everyone else. And as far as I can see, Jericho's done that. So, no problem with it at all. Weapon Alexx asked the following questions. Your thoughts on Fozzy, and should they perform at WrestleMania? To be honest, I don't really listen to a lot of Fozzy. You'd think, like, oh, you're such a big Jericholic, hey, you listen to Fozzy, Fozzy's your favorite band. Not really. My favorite band's My Chemical Romance, for those of you wondering. Fozzy, I can't say I've never listened to them. Like, I do like some of their songs. But in terms of, like, I don't own any of their albums, even digitally. Like, I have some of their songs, like, that I'll listen to. I really like Broken Soul. Like, that's a really good song. Enemies, okay. And their cover of SOS by ABBA is awesome. Like, that is honestly, like, I can give them major props for that. Like, I love rock covers of pop songs, and that cover is really, really awesome. And but like in terms of their music, like they're more of a metal band, and I'm not super into metal. Like, I'm more pop punk, post-hardcore kind of music, and Fozzy really never kind of catered to that. Jericho's singing voice is fine. Sometimes it kind of sounds a little off. Sometimes it sounds a little like auto-tune, and I'm not really a huge fan of that. But again, like that, there are exceptions to that. Like, again, the SOS cover. If you guys haven't heard that, I think it's a really, really good song, especially if you're a fan of ABBA and you really like that song. Very, very good cover. And should they perform at WrestleMania? I think in the age of Jericho, and especially this type of character, if he sang himself to the ring, that would be awesome. I really don't understand why they haven't done that. That would actually be a fantastic idea. If another wrestler had a Fozzy song as their theme song, which they probably would never do because they usually like to give their own production themes, I would have no problem with it. I mean, I always am a fan of bands singing a wrestler to the ring, regardless of the band and who it is. But I definitely, like, I'm picturing that now, like Jericho singing himself to the ring, or even if Fozzy did a cover of Jericho's WWE theme, if Jericho just sang himself while he was walking to the ring, that would be hilarious. That would have been one of the greatest entrances, probably even the greatest entrance of all time. That would have been awesome. Thank you for that idea. Now I want that to happen. So, favorite Y2J match in the 2010s? I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I'm trying to think. 2010s. I really like the match with Punk at WrestleMania and Extreme Rules. Big fans of those matches. And I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I enjoyed his match with AJ Styles at WrestleMania and at Fastlane. And I think that those would be my top picks. CM Punk at WrestleMania 28, Extreme Rules 2012, and AJ Styles at Fastlane and WrestleMania 32. He's had good matches, don't get me wrong. But I think like his 2014 run, like none of those matches really stood out to me. That run kind of fell flat. He had a good run in 2013. 2012 was good, obviously, but I really think he's kind of shined in 2012 and 2016 as far as the 2010s go. But if I had to pick one match out of those four, I think I'll go with CM Punk versus Chris Jericho at WrestleMania 28 because I was really, really excited for that match. I think maybe AJ and Jericho at WrestleMania could have been a little higher if it was the first time they'd met, not the fourth. But again, I think I was really, really excited for that match. That match is the one I've rewatched the most. And, it just kind of holds a little bit of sentimental value because, WrestleMania 28 was one of my favorite WrestleManias growing up. When I say growing up, I mean, it happened when I was in high school, but, not to get like in a personal scenario, but like around freshman year of high school, like, I wasn't in the best place. And WrestleMania 28 really helped me out, get through that year. And, it's the hype, the year-long hype of rocking John Cena, and then having Jericho come back was even better because he was my favorite wrestler. So I really enjoyed that match. Not to get emotional or sappy. What the hell's going on? It's the Chris Jericho Q&A. Next question. Should Y2J hold a championship right now? If so, which one? To be honest, I don't think he needs to hold any more titles. As we know, Jericho is not the in-ring competitor he used to be. Therefore, I don't think Jericho should really be in a title hunt. I really think titles are meant for people who are still actively part of the company. And since Jericho is pretty much part-time, he does his stints. I really don't think he can challenge for a title. Like, totally. Like, if Jericho was in a main event for a WWE championship, totally fine with that. I just don't think he should win it. Totally fine with, him being thrown into title matches for, just the sake of having a good challenger to beat. Like, if they wanted the IC champion to have a good challenger for the next pay-per-view and they set him up with Jericho, totally fine with that. And even the WWE championship, totally fine with that. As for winning, doesn't need to hold one right now as far as I'm concerned. Next set of questions from Steven Taylor. Should Chris Jericho go back to Toronto? He is from Winnipeg, you idiot. Why does Chris Jericho close his eyes when he does the Walls of Jericho? I have no fucking idea. I don't know, maybe he wants to make the move look believable, so when he cinches it in, he's gonna close his eyes. I don't know. Were you angry when Triple H buried Jericho at WrestleMania 18, and how funny is it that Triple H's best friend Shawn Michaels saved Jericho's career and helped Jericho recover, and even Kevin Nash puts him over? Well, I'll have to be honest with you. I started watching wrestling, late 2002, early 2003. I didn't watch WrestleMania 18 when it happened, so as far as I'm concerned, when I first started watching, I had never even known that Jericho was a champion, which I guess speaks to the fact that he probably was buried by Triple H, at WrestleMania. Not that he was buried via losing, but he was made to look like a joke throughout that entire feud. It was all about Stephanie, it was all about Triple H, it was never really about Jericho. So I will say that definitely did not make him look good. Your thoughts on Jericho beating up Goldberg? That's pretty crazy to me, and I've heard this story to death, Jericho's told it all the time. Everyone's always mentioned it. The story sounds pretty legit, like it doesn't sound like anything anyone would make up. I even heard, this is something I just found out recently. I had heard that their argument was settled in a dispute on Wrestler's Court, and Triple H decided that Goldberg had to apologize to Jericho in front of everyone, and he had to admit to Jericho that he was always the better wrestler, which I didn't even know about, but that sounds believable to me. I guess, him beating up Goldberg, it just shows that Jericho's tough, or that, and that Goldberg, can't really mess with anyone he wants to. And I'm sure it's all water under the bridge now. Like, I'm sure Jericho and Goldberg don't hate each other. I'm sure that, this doesn't haunt Goldberg at night, right before he goes to bed. And I'm sure Jericho doesn't sit on a pedestal every night saying, oh, I beat up Goldberg once in 2003. Not a big deal at all. It's just something that happened. That happens all the time with wrestlers. They always beat each other up. They get mad at each other and then they fist fight. That's what happens all the time. So, I'm not too angry over that, but, very, very, very interesting story to say the least. Top 3 in-ring chemistries for Jericho. Number 1 has to be Shawn Michaels. I really can't think of anything better than Shawn Michaels. He was the perfect opponent for Chris Jericho, especially heel versus face. They've had a couple face versus face matches that have been good, but heel Jericho versus face Shawn Michaels, what more could you ask for? And I think the best example of chemistry, when I really think about it, was Unforgiven 2008. What a great match. It was the unsanctioned match between Michaels and Jericho, and the storytelling in that match was perfect. I loved every second of it. Jericho, especially in the beginning of his heel run, and like that, I know you asked in-ring chemistry, so you really focused on wrestling, but that whole highlight reel segment was so great with Jericho and Michaels when Jericho turned on him. What a great opponent for him, absolutely amazing stuff. You always got a great match with these two, and the ladder match is unbelievable. You have the classic WrestleMania match, a perfect opponent for Chris Jericho, and they're very similar. They have similar styles, and, they both, no one is a better babyface in peril than Shawn Michaels, but Jericho also has that sympathy that he can get from the crowd. Very, very similar wrestlers with similar styles, but yet they're very different, and perfect opponent, and he always had a great match with Shawn Michaels, and I know it's hard not to have a great match with Shawn Michaels, but everything clicked so well with those two. Number 2, probably would have to be Chris Benoit, slowly behind him, but same principle with Shawn Michaels. Just, they always had great matches. You really can't complain when, it's Jericho and Benoit. You know, and that's just one of those things that just resonates. You know, you always had Jericho and Benoit, Jericho, Benoit. Really, really great chemistry there. You know, they have the history. And not just in WWE, you know, you had the matches from New Japan and the Super J Cup. You know, those matches are great. I love every second of those matches. But really, you know, Jericho really, he shined well with Benoit. It really showed Jericho's strengths, you know, and they did the technical stuff, they did the high flying stuff, they had everything. You know, they had that submission match. I believe Backlash was a submission match, or I do have that backwards. It might have been Judgment Day. I think Judgment Day was the submission match, and you know you had the classic ladder match at Royal Rumble, which is probably their best match ever, and you have the great 2 out of 3 falls match, and they did it all. They could do everything, similar to how Shawn Michaels and Jericho could do everything. But Benoit and Jericho, you know, no matter what you did, that was always a match you could fall back on. They always had great matches, and they were always willing. Like, it was perfect. It was always great, always great. I would say number 3, probably Rey Mysterio, if I had to think off the top of my head. I mean, Jericho works great as like a counter to the Lucha Libre style, but, you know, those matches in '09 were fucking awesome, and that match of the Bash is a classic, a really, really great match. And I think Mysterio, you know, Mysterio has that he has that size to where even someone like Jericho, who's really not all that big, can really tower over him and really make a fun dynamic. And, you know, Jericho with any luchador, you know, Jericho and Hoovy, like they've had great matches. And Jericho with any sort of cruiserweight always has great matches. Jericho and Guerrero, even though Guerrero isn't a super lucha style, still a good example. But Jericho and Rey had great matches. Even in WCW, they had really good matches. But yeah, no, the matches at the Bash and Extreme Rules '09 are some of my favorite matches ever from Jericho. Really, really great stuff. And I mean, like, it just, the styles are so similar, but yet they're so different. You know, what I loved about the WWE matches is it was sort of a callback to the cruiserweight matches, and I really enjoyed that, and I really enjoyed the WWE matches that they've had. Definitely fun matches to check out. And with Jericho's character, the in-ring work was really enhanced because Jericho had more of a slow, methodical style while also having high-flying moves. So you have Rey's constant popcorn-style offense counteracted by Jericho's very monotonous yet deliberate offense, which really made a fun dynamic. So overall, I'd say number 3, Rey Mysterio, number 2, Chris Benoit, and number 1, Shawn Michaels. And your final question, should Jericho have went to SmackDown in 2004? Honestly, no, because, I mean, while it would have been fun, it would have been nice, it would have been a nice refresher, I honestly don't think he needed to. I think Raw was kind of barren without him. And again, I mean, 2003, Jericho was the best part of Raw, and while 2004, he kind of trailed off and kind of found himself in mid-card hell with really nothing to do. Once Christian got injured, he kind of floundered for a bit. I mean, he was still one of the best parts of Raw. He was still entertaining, and I mean, really, it could go either way, because 2004 SmackDown really wasn't the greatest thing in the entire world. So, I mean, anything to save that show would have been welcome, absolutely. But I really don't think Jericho was needed. And besides, Jericho really wasn't that big of a star in 2004. I mean, someone like Triple H going over there, or Shawn Michaels, even though Shawn Michaels didn't want to go to SmackDown because of, I think it had to do with church, I don't know. But, you know, maybe Orton, someone like that. But Jericho was kind of directionless and really didn't have anything to do. So maybe going to SmackDown would have been fine. But my gut instinct says no, even though it totally would have been fine. You know, it wouldn't have been a bad thing. But I definitely think, you know, he was fine on Raw. Celtic Bird asked the following questions. Jericho often talks about the potential there was for a Chris Jericho-Eddie Guerrero tag team, even going as far as calling it the greatest tag team that never was. Do you think there was a lot of potential for that team, and why do you think it never came to fruition? I do believe there was a lot of potential in that type of tag team, because 1, Jericho and Eddie are great wrestlers, and 2, even more so than being a great wrestler, Jericho and Eddie had that same characteristic that I mentioned earlier with Jericho was, you know, when they were a face, you loved them, and when they were a heel, you absolutely hated them. More so with Eddie Guerrero, to be honest. I mean, Eddie really had that charm to him, where he could be the most lovable person in the world, but then he can just be the biggest backstabbing bastard that you ever had met. So I really think they could have had a great dynamic with both a heel and a face as like tag team. They really could have made both work. As far as why it never came to fruition, I think it just was timing. I mean, they could have done it in WCW, but WCW was not concerned with younger guys like Jericho and Guerrero. You know what I mean? They stuck him in the tag team, not the tag team division. They stuck him in the cruiserweight division where they both thrived. I mean, obviously, they even had that epic match at Fall Brawl. I love that match. But, as far as, pushing talent, Jericho and Guerrero, they were in WCW at the same time, but they weren't a priority in the company. They were too worried about the NWO, and they were worried about their top guys. And, rightfully so, you need to worry about your top guys, but you also need to worry about making new stars. And really, they never made any sort of effort to make Jericho and Guerrero, legit stars. So I think a tag team like them, they would have just been made to look like jokes, and they would have gotten destroyed with whoever were the tag team champions at that time. As far as WWE goes, I just don't think Guerrero and Jericho were ever on the same show. As far as I know, and I could be, my memory of the early my memory of the early brand split is a bit fuzzy, but I really don't remember Jericho and Eddie ever being on the same show. Because what I remember is Jericho was on SmackDown and Eddie was on Raw for the early portions of the brand split, like when it first happened. And then I think around the same time, Jericho jumped to Raw and Eddie jumped to SmackDown, and that stayed that way until Eddie died in 2005. So it never really came to fruition because they just were never on the same show. And, in the early 2000s, in the year 2000, I should say, when Jericho was in the company, Eddie was doing the Radicals thing. He was more associated with Benoit than he was with Jericho. So, and then, of course, Eddie got fired from WWE in, 2001, mid to late 2001, when Jericho was really on the rise to becoming a main event player. So the timing never worked out for the two of them. They were never on the same show when the brand split happened, and then they just never were around each other. And when they weren't mixed together, if you know what I mean. Jericho was always associated with someone else, and Eddie was always associated with someone else. It just never worked. 2. Why did we never reserve a big-time heated feud between Chris Jericho and The Undertaker? In fact, if I'm not mistaken, the only match between the two on WWE television was a one-off on an episode of SmackDown. I believe you are correct. I do not remember any other Jericho-Undertaker matches. I know that SmackDown match made it to Jericho's DVD, probably because, he never really wrestled The Undertaker. I always think about a Jericho-Undertaker feud. The thing about it is, it really could have been entertaining no matter when you had it. I mean, maybe in the 2000s, Jericho wasn't seasoned and he wasn't ready for The Undertaker, and maybe the acid tongue rock star Chris Jericho shouldn't have feuded with the big bad American badass The Undertaker, just because those are two characters who, they are different, but they're kind of alike in the same sort of philosophical way. They both have their I don't give a fuck attitude, I'm gonna beat to my own drum kind of deal. But around 2003, 2004, I think maybe when Jericho had the heel persona, when he was all full of himself and he was, the king of bling bling, and then you had the mean, nasty Undertaker, that could have been money right there. I think Jericho, having just that very just selfish attitude, and Undertaker's whole thing being shut up and fight, and Jericho, kind of like how The Miz is now a little bit, the moneymaker thing. He was always worried about how he looked, how he came off to people. Jericho was very selfish, and Undertaker's very selfless, if you know what I mean. So I think that dynamic could have been really well done. I also think in the late 2000s, a Jericho-Undertaker feud could have been really, really awesome, because I think one thing that really could have been nice is if Jericho, as the heel persona, as, the wise man gimmick that Jericho had, I think maybe, when Jericho feuded with Ray, and he, dissected the philosophy behind his mask, I think it would be great if we could see him dissect the philosophy behind the Undertaker's dead man persona. Why do you think you're dead, the Undertaker? Why do you use your mythical powers? Why can't you face me like a man? What are you hiding behind that mystique? Why are you hiding behind the fog? I really think if we dived into some sort of philosophical feud, it could have been awesome. The match quality would have been awesome. It's Chris Jericho and The Undertaker. Of course it would have been awesome. But I think the storytelling could have been great if Jericho really just laid into it. I think that was the prime time to do it. 08, 09, but the problem was Undertaker, that's when he was starting to go into the part-time territory. And 08, 09, and 010. 010? Fuck me. 2008, 2009, 2010. There we go. Pretty much the last years of Jericho going full-time. And again, like with the Guerrero tag team, the timing just never really worked out. But I do think a Jericho Undertaker feud would have been amazing, and especially during that time of Jericho's honest man gimmick, of just, really laying into the philosophical side of the Undertaker and why it is that the Undertaker is this way. Question 3. What is one match of Jericho's career that, in your opinion, is one of the best he's ever had that just seems to go under the radar of many wrestling fans? Well, I don't want to give one answer because I think there are several. And I mean, not to just be like, oh my God, everything Jericho touches is gold. Nothing like that. One match I really think is like flies under the radar entirely is WrestleMania 20, Chris Jericho versus Christian. Fantastic match, really, really great match. I think it gets overshadowed by the triple threat that happened later that night and the fact that WWE doesn't really like to bring up WrestleMania 20 at all anymore. So I really, really, really enjoyed that match. Another really, really classic match that I love is Chris Jericho and Juventud Guerrera from Super Brawl. I think that's probably Jericho's most underrated match, or I shouldn't say underrated. I think a lot of people know it's a great match. But when discussing Jericho's best match, I really don't think this gets mentioned a lot. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I love this match more than a lot of people, but I would go as far as to say this is probably Jericho's best WCW match. I love this match. I love everything about it. I know, I've watched this match so many times. This is one of my favorite matches. So many good spots. And I love Jericho's heel banter at the end when Juventud has to unmask. Because as we all know, in Lucha, the mask is sacred. It's your identity. Unmasking is it's such a big deal. And while he's doing that, Jericho is just cutting this promo on Juvi, calling him Quasi-Juice and Quasimodo and all that, making references, obviously, to the Hunchback of Notre Dame. And, saying how ugly he was and everything. It's just hilarious. And, to top that off, and what I mentioned before, how Jericho was a comedic heel. He had all these ridiculous attributes to him, but he was a legitimate wrestler. He could legitimately kick your ass. He had all these great moves. And Jericho displayed so many great moves. He had, a reverse suplex and the double arm backbreaker, the lion tamer, all those great moves. He did the full sprint lion salt. You know what I mean? Just so many great moments, and I like the sort of dusty finish of Juvi thinking he won the belt, and just a really, really good match. I really, really enjoy it. Not a lot of people bring it up, and I mean, when people bring up Jericho's best WCW matches, I think they'll mention the Guerrero match from Fall Brawl, and I think this match does get mentioned, but I think people just kind of make a separate category for the WCW matches. But really, this is up there with some of Jericho's best matches ever. Really, really great match. So, question 4. You've probably answered this a million times over again. In parentheses, he says, sorry. No need to be sorry, man. Never be sorry. Was there ever a one defining moment, match, promo, or angle that made Chris Jericho your favorite? What was it? And when did you realize he was your all-time favorite? I'm very glad you asked this question, because for a while, I never really knew why Jericho was my favorite wrestler. And I've recently, and when I say recently, I literally mean in the last couple weeks, I figured out why. Now, I've always kind of attributed to the fact that Jericho looked cool, and, his matches were always good, and I liked his theme song, and I liked his entrance, and all the attributes of a professional wrestler I liked as a kid. Jericho had it all. But I'm starting to realize why I gravitated towards Jericho, because when I think about it, I started watching wrestling religiously in late 02, early 03. Really started to get into it around mid 03, if you know what I mean. So I thought about it, and it was just when I look back on it, I'm Jericho was a heel. And I mean, I wasn't a smart 5-year-old, you know what I mean? I liked the good guys, and I hated the bad guys. I fucking hated Evolution and Triple H, and I loved Goldberg and all those people. And, I hated Christian, and I hated Tess, and I hated all those guys, and I loved Booker T, but for some weird reason, Chris Jericho was the biggest heel, but I loved him. He was my favorite wrestler, and I had no idea why. And I just found it out. Ever since I've been redoing these Raw reviews, I've been going back and watching the 2003 Raws, I've come up with a conclusion, and that's Chris Jericho was the best part of those shows. And, here's the thing about me. I really don't feel like I've changed in terms of what I like, and, I'm, in terms of my interests, video games, reading, music, all that stuff. I'm the same person as I was when I was, 6, 5, 7 years old. You know what I mean? And I like how I made the numbers 5, 6, and 7 completely out of order for some weird reason. I have no idea. But, for example, my favorite band when I was 6 years old was My Chemical Romance. My favorite band when I'm 19 years old, is My Chemical Romance. So what I found entertaining as a kid, I still find entertaining as an adult, if you know what I mean. Like, I really, that really isn't something that, I don't really change what I like, if you know what I mean. And that being said, now that I find Jericho the most entertaining part of Raw in 2003, I obviously found him the most entertaining part of Raw when I watched it live in 2003 when I was a little kid. And I guess for me, even though the fact that Jericho was a heel, that didn't bother me. He was the one that brought me the most entertainment. He's the one I enjoyed watching the most. And aside from that, again, Jericho just looked cool. He had the long blonde hair. His gear was always cool. I liked the countdown in his entrance. I liked everything about him. But I think I find like I figured out the focal point of why Jericho's my favorite wrestler is just because he was the best part of Raw when I was watching Raw. And I was always a Raw guy. I was never a SmackDown guy. And I would watch SmackDown occasionally. Like, I would watch it maybe probably 2 or 3 like weeks out of the month, if you know what I mean. And I enjoyed SmackDown. Like, I liked watching it, but I always preferred Raw. And I was always a Raw guy. And whoever was on SmackDown, I don't care who you are. You got to be on Raw because Raw is my show. I was a very, diehard Raw fan in the terms of like the early brand split days. Big time Raw guy. And to me, Jericho was on the show that I preferred, and he was the best part of the show that I preferred. So to me, Jericho was above everyone else, and I think that's how he became my favorite wrestler. Again, there was no reason I should have liked him. He was a heel, and I hated all the other heels, but I liked Chris Jericho. So in the end, that's what it was. He was just the most entertaining part of Raw, and I couldn't help but be entertained, and realized that I was entertained, and made him my favorite wrestler. And your last question, is it me, or was every Chris Jericho versus John Cena match one giant letdown after another, with the exception of their classic at SummerSlam '05? Even though both are two of the best ever and more than competent enough in the ring and have the ability to put on 5-star classics over and over again, I've always felt their matches just sort of fell flat. I have to agree with you. And I will also point out, I recently watched the SummerSlam match between Jericho and John Cena. Fun fact, I was actually at that show, SummerSlam 2005. That was in the Verizon Center in Washington, D.C., although it was once known as the MCI Center. And it was still known as the MCI Center back in '05. But yeah, I went to that SummerSlam, and I remember everything about that show because I think that was my first pay-per-view. That was my first pay-per-view I ever went to, was SummerSlam '05. And that was the match I wanted to look forward to most. Now, I don't want to say I was a smart, 8-year-old, because let's see, 2005, I was 8 years old when that happened. Yeah, no, I really enjoyed that match. Of course, I was chanting "Let's go Jericho." It didn't matter if he was the heel; he was my favorite wrestler, and I wanted him to win. And but I really enjoyed that match. And looking back on it, especially in the early Cena days, where John Cena really wasn't the wrestler he was now. Jericho really gave him a good match, and it was really like it was built around John Cena's strengths. That's what I really liked, and that's something you really don't see a lot nowadays. Like wrestlers altering their style to work to the strengths of their opponent. I think everyone kind of just does their deal, like they do what they want, and sometimes styles mesh and sometimes styles clash, no pun intended. And I think like Jericho really did a good job. That's probably one of Jericho's best performances, not from sheer match quality alone, like oh, it's a 4-star match in comparison to his other 5-star classics. I don't mean it like that. I mean Jericho as a performer, making someone like Cena in '05, who was not the best wrestler at the time, really shine. So I will give Jericho mad props for that. Other than that, though, a majority of their matches occurred in '08, '09, and 2010, during Jericho's Honest Man gimmick run. And I agree, a lot of those matches fell flat. I really don't know why. Because again, I think you're right, but I think maybe a majority of it was the timing. Because Jericho, I don't want to say he wasn't in good ring shape in '08 through 2010, but I mean, a lot of his great matches were with guys like Shawn Michaels and Rey Mysterio, like high-flying guys. And when you have someone like John Cena, who's really not the wrestler those two guys are, I don't mean that as a burial, or I don't mean that as he's not as talented as them. His style is very different, and I don't think Jericho was really used to working that style with his new sort of gimmick. Because as you know, Jericho changed a lot about himself with that heel run. He did still have some of his high-flying offense. He still did the line. He still did the lion salt. He still did the springboard dropkick. But he kind of had to change how he acted in the ring. Like, he didn't do that cocky cover anymore, where he'd put his foot on someone's torso and then flex and be like, "Come on, baby!" Like, he didn't do that anymore. So it was maybe like a clash of Cena, like not really having the offense to really counteract Cena's weaknesses. Because to me, John Cena really didn't become like a really, really great wrestler until the later portions of his career, maybe around like 2000, maybe 2011, 2012, is when John Cena really started to get it in the ring, like when he really started to figure everything out for himself. I think around this time, especially during like the late 2000s when John Cena was just everywhere, you know what I mean? Like when I look back at 08, 09, 2010, 2011, like John Cena was just everywhere you looked. And these weren't really the greatest of times. Especially looking back now, like 2009, 2010, I think those years are terrible. You know what I mean? Like there were some good points of it, but like especially 2010, like Jesus Christ, I just think that year was awful. But as far as John Cena and Jericho go, I agree. Like it's a lot of it I think was just a very unique style that John Cena really wasn't used to, and Jericho, I don't want to say within the limitations of his character, but having to almost reassess John Cena's style under his new gimmick, under his new persona. It makes sense that, their matches were different than they were in 2005 when Jericho was still rocking the heel Y2J character. But there was no more Y2J in 2010, you know what I mean? So, if I have to make a guess, I would just say it's a completely different Jericho, not knowing how to really counteract Cena's offense and not really working to his strengths. I think that's a majority of it. And I remember they were the main event in Survivor Series 2010, I believe. No. Survivor Series 2008. There we go. They were the main event of that match, and it wasn't anything good. And I credit that to just a conflict of styles. And I mean, there's really not much more I can say about it. Next set of questions from Crazy Cobra 1. Which of Jericho's matches with AJ Styles is your favorite? Off the top of my head, I'd have to say the WrestleMania match. I just think, with the grand stage and everything, I thought it was their best match. It would have been fun to having seen that match for the first time instead of the fourth time, but overall, I think that was the best match of the four. Again, it's on the grand stage of WrestleMania in AT&T Stadium. How can you beat that? And Jericho got the win, which was, he really didn't need it, but as a Jericholic, it was always fun to see him get a win at WrestleMania. So I'm going to say WrestleMania 32. What is your favorite Jericho DVD? By default, I have to say Breaking the Code, Behind the Walls of Chris Jericho. I don't really own any other Jericho DVDs. I know there was that one that came out in like the 90s, like on VHS. I don't have my hands on that priceless gem. And I know there was that one like Road is Jericho or whatever. To be honest, I have not bought a single wrestling DVD since the network came out. So I have to say by default Breaking the Code. And even if I had the others, I would probably say that's my favorite. The documentary on that show, on that DVD I should say, is really, really good. And the extras are really nice. I love one of the extras they included on that DVD was like a post-Raw segment with him and Austin. Hilarious stuff. I love that little segment. And, they have like highlight reels and video packages and stories, and the match selection on that DVD is really, really good. So yeah, I would say it's a great DVD, probably my favorite wrestling DVD they've ever done, just because it's Chris Jericho. What are your thoughts on Jericho's feud with Cena in 05? A good feud for Cena. I mean, Cena had to come to Raw. He had to establish himself as the new WWE champion because they're doing the flip-flops. And I mean, if you look at it with the draft, like when they swapped Batista and John Cena, they both had done everything they could have done on their respective shows. So it was time for, a new championship with new fresh faces. And, Jericho was out. He was out the door. He said he needed time off, and he was going to get time off. So I think it was nice that they gave Jericho, a world championship match in the main event of SummerSlam before he eventually took his break from wrestling for 2 years. So I'm very, very, very happy that he got that feud, and I was very happy that I got to see it because, as I've said before, I was at SummerSlam 05 when Cena and Jericho faced each other. So that was very fun for me as a little kid. But I thought it was good. Jericho was a great heel. I mean, this is when he really did his final heel turn before he took his break. He was a good heel for Cena to squander, and I loved when Jericho aligns himself with Bischoff because when Jericho's a heel, he's such a great kiss ass, and it's great to see them both aligned. But yeah, no, I really enjoyed the feud. Very good for Cena in his opening days in Raw. Question 4, do you think Jericho should have won a Money in the Bank match? I know he's credited for, creating it, which he did, but no, he never really should have won one. There was never really a good opportunity for him to win one. The only time I ever think he had the potential to win one was the first one in 2005 at WrestleMania 21. But as we know, that was Edge's match to win, and I feel like if Jericho had won, like if Jericho did what Edge did, it would have been cool. But like I think that just suited Edge a lot more, like that opportunist type of gimmick. So I think, his only time he really could have won a match, or a Money in the Bank match, was WrestleMania 21. And I think that just had Edge written all over it. He was just never at the right place at the right time. And all the other matches he's competed in, all the other Money in the Banks he's competed in. Let's see, 2010, he was on his way out, didn't need to win it. 2012, he was part of that like 5-way Money in the Bank. That was like the worst Money in the Bank of all time. He didn't need to win the WWE Championship. He was on his way out too. He was going to be gone like 2 months later. So he didn't need to win that either. And 2016, which is his most recent one, I believe, that's the last Money in the Bank match he was in, he didn't need to win that either. Dean Ambrose winning was a good move. So, no, he really never should have won a Money in the Bank ladder match. And finally, what is your favorite highlight reel? I have a couple, but I think my favorite has to be the final highlight reel, quote unquote, with him and Shawn Michaels before he officially turned heel. I think that was an amazing segment. It was so great. You could see Jericho slowly morphing into a heel before your very eyes. And what I love about that heel turn, what I love about Jericho's heel turn in 08, was it had a reason behind it. You know what I mean? It had a good reason. Because Jericho said, like, why is it that when I am honest and when I try and do the right thing, you people boo me? But when this guy comes out and lies to all of you, you cheer for him. Like, it made perfect sense. Like, when I look at it now, it's like, damn, we all should have been cheering Jericho. He was someone that stood up for what was right. So seeing the heel turn unfold before your very eyes, it's really great. And Jericho's so great on the mic, and Shawn Michaels is so great on the mic. And the segment where he just beats the shit out of Michaels, like, is such a good segment. One of my favorite segments of all time, and my favorite highlight reel. Mazda MS21 asks, should Jericho win the WWE Championship one last time? Definitely not. I don't think he needs the championship. And again, he's kind of a shell of what he used to be in the ring. I don't mean that in a bad way. But let's just be real. He's old. That's what happens when you get old. He really shouldn't be, getting titles. He shouldn't have titles around his waist. He shouldn't be defending titles in main events. Again, I'm totally fine if they want a champion to have a good challenger and they put him in the ring with Jericho. Totally fine with that. Not going to complain. I mean, I really wouldn't want to see Jericho challenge for the title at a WrestleMania or even like a SummerSlam. But, let's just say, sometimes like the Royal Rumble WWE Championship match, it's kind of, I don't want to say a throwaway match, but they kind of give it to someone who, might not be in the main event picture or might not be in the title hunt, just to keep the champion busy because the real main event's the Royal Rumble. So if they wanted to give Jericho a title match at the Royal Rumble, that's fine. Or if they wanted to give him a title match at Battleground or Payback or TLC or something like that, I'm not going to complain. But as for him winning the title, I don't think that needs to happen. Who was his best tag team partner, Benoit, Christian, or Big Show? All three are definitely top contenders for being his best tag team partner. But for me personally, I'm always a sucker for hilariously cheesy humor. So with that said, I need to go with Christian as his best tag team partner. I mean, Jericho and Christian were a great tag team, but when it comes to stupid comedy and being just genuinely entertaining, you got to give it to them. And like I've said, when I've been going back and watching these 2003 Raws, the best parts of Raw are Chris Jericho and Christian. They're amazing. They're a great tag team, and there's so many great segments with them, so many great moments like the towel segment, which we'll get to later on this Q&A. I love every second of it. I mean, Benoit was probably his best from a wrestling standpoint. They always had great matches. They had that fucking awesome tag team match on Raw with Austin and Triple H, and they had the awesome TLC match. They were a great team. Big Show, again, a good counter to Jericho. Here's the quick, nimble guy, and here's the big, powerful, unstoppable force. And they had good moments together too, and they had a good run as tag team champs. So I mean, Big Show was another great partner for Jericho, and they made it work. It seemed like it was kind of phoned in at the last second, but it worked between the two of them. But Christian, man, they just had unbelievable chemistry. They were hilarious. They were the best parts of Raw, no matter what they did. I love them in the ring together. They were so over the top, and like they both had kind of, I want to say, fallen from grace. But compared to Edge, Christian really wasn't doing much. He was kind of just floundering, and Jericho had fallen way, way off the radar since he had lost the title at WrestleMania 18 earlier that year, because they formed in like late 2002. And they did have a successful run as the tag team champs, and I did like them as a tag team. And I think maybe what drives it even more is their split. Like, I really liked their WrestleMania match. I liked the tension that rose between the two of them when Jericho started flirting with Trish and all that. I liked the bet between the two of them. Like, I loved the love angle between him and Lita and Trish. Like, I really loved that angle, and I love that storyline. And I just thought they were great together. So I will say Christian, best partner. Most underrated Jericho match. I mentioned it before in this Q&A, and I'm going to mention it again. SummerSlam 2005, Jericho and Cena. That match had no right to be as good as it was. And, the split crowd really added to it. And it's a really, really good match. Like, I almost forgot how great this match was. I went back and watched it recently, and it's a really good match. Everything about it's great, and it's not that long. It's probably about maybe 14 minutes or so. But it is very, very good. And it caters to Cena's strengths. The storyline was great. Jericho was a great heel for Cena to overcome. I love kiss-ass Jericho. He was such a suck-up. He was brown-nosing Eric Bischoff to no end. And, Cena was great in this match. He was a great rambunctious face, that was anti-authority, anti-establishment. And Jericho was like the traditional heel who wanted everything to stay the same. He wanted to be the champ people could be proud of. They played up, the common street thug white trash angle, which, can get tired after a while. But, it worked for this. And, Jericho performed so well in this match. And he really studied Cena in advance. And it paid off. Really, really great match between the two of them. And there's really no complaints. And I mean, again, as I said before, with the Cena matches, this is really the only true Cena Jericho match. It's really, really good. And, it was a great ending to, a great run for Jericho. To get that WWE title match at SummerSlam. Great moment for him. And just a great match. So I love that match. It barely gets talked about, even when it comes to, best SummerSlam matches. No one really brings it up. And when it comes to best Jericho matches, no one brings it up. And even best Cena matches. With all the great matches Cena's had over the past, 2 or 3 years, this isn't brought up. And in terms of early John Cena, this is probably his best match. I mean, when you look at the early days of Cena from 2002 to 2006, I mean, this and that No Mercy match with Kurt Angle, those were his best matches without a doubt. How do you see the last match of his career? This is what I want to happen. I mean, I'm thinking WWE's going to want to give Jericho a good, good last match and a good send off with the crowd cheering for him. But what I want to happen is I want Jericho to be doing something stupid like the whole, gift to Jericho, drink it in, man. And then, he just gets destroyed by someone. Let's just say, I don't know, Nakamura. Let's just use Nakamura as an example. Nakamura makes his debut on the main roster, and Jericho, is his opponent, his new opponent. Jericho just, does something stupid. He's drink it in, man. He, has his arms out, and he's doing something dumb, and then Nakamura just knees him right in the face with the Bumaye and stuff like that, or Kinshasa or whatever. And Jericho just gets pinned 1, 2, 3, and he just gets taken out, and then Nakamura is celebrating. I'm using Nakamura as an example. You could put anyone in this scenario, but I'm just using him. And then Jericho's just fuck this, I'm out. And he just he's embarrassed because, he lost in 3 seconds and everything. And he just, it's fuck you to the crowd, fuck you, screw this job, I'm out. That's how I think Jericho's going to go out. And it would only make sense for him to go out like that. Jericho's not the type of guy that, is going to have a retirement segment on Raw the next day. He doesn't need something like that. I think people would much rather want to boo Jericho on his way out than, chant thank you, Jericho. You know what I mean? And I mean, he might get that anyway, because he has such a great following, and he's such a great wrestler, and he's so loyal, and so many people know him, and he's so over with the crowd. I think if people know it's Jericho's last match, and he would definitely not be the person to announce his last match in advance. Like a Shawn Michaels, where it was streak versus career, we all knew where it was going. and like, different wrestlers. Like, he would never announce. And I don't see his last match being at like WrestleMania 33. I could see his last match being at a house show. You know what I mean? Like, he's so anti, like, he just, not anti, I shouldn't say it like that. He's just so not the norm when it comes to retiring after a lengthy career. And he has such a lengthy career and such longevity with the fans, and he's so beloved that he might have to do this big retirement send-off against his will. The fans might just do it for him. But I think if Jericho had the decision, I think he would want some sort of, I don't know, just embarrassing defeat as his final moments in the company as an active wrestler. And then your final question, if Jericho and Undertaker had a 1-versus-1 rivalry, how should it have been booked? Well, I did mention how I would have wanted to see Jericho kind of, be the honest man. And I think two scenarios. If we were doing this in 2008, 2009, I think we could have Jericho kind of interrupt, maybe like if The Undertaker's doing one of his entrances on SmackDown, he comes through the fog, and I think maybe Jericho could interrupt the entrance, like maybe not like in person, maybe on the Tron, like, like he could like turn the lights all on and like clear the fog and just be like, who are you? You're not some sort of dead man. You're a mortal man like you and I. Like, prove to me that you're actually the dead man, Undertaker, and you're not just some phony, walking through fog with some mascara and eyeliner on. Tell me who you really are. Like, something like that. Like, have Jericho question all of Undertaker's immortality traits. You know what I mean? Like have him question legitimacy of the character. On the flip side, I think another cool angle could have been, maybe after Survivor Series 2001. Think about this. Remember after Survivor Series 01 when Jericho cost The Rock, or seemingly cost The Rock, the WWF Alliance match, and Undertaker pulled Jericho aside? Well, let's start a brawl. Let's do that. Undertaker and Jericho get into a brawl in Survivor Series, and Undertaker wants to use this feud as a way to discipline Jericho. Says Jericho's all talk, all he does is think about himself. He's not a company guy. He needs to carry the weight on his shoulders. He needs to be a proud member of the WWF. But Jericho, all he can think about is himself and, who his next opponent's going to be, and if he's the biggest star in the world. And have him kind of have this sort of be like a discipline, like a test for Jericho. Like Undertaker was kind of doing it like as, I don't want to say out of love, but like he wants to see Jericho get better. So he wants to see Jericho stop worrying about himself and maybe worry about other people. And then maybe have Jericho take exception to this by like attacking Undertaker, maybe attack his bike. And, maybe, just get under his skin. That's my plan B. But I think the best thing to do with a Jericho-Undertaker feud would be Jericho individually picking apart Undertaker's dead man persona and trying to disprove it. And then the payoff would be Jericho defeating The Undertaker. Like, that's what Jericho's goal is. Jericho wants to defeat The Undertaker in a match to prove that he is so mortal. Maybe have it as be a submission match. He wants to see Jericho wants to see The Undertaker give up because he's in so much pain. He wants to see him prove his mortality by tapping out. So I think that could have been a good send off. So the 2001 thing is my plan B. My plan A would have been an honest man Jericho versus a dead man Undertaker, with Jericho picking apart all of the dead man's persona, all the pieces of his persona, which climaxes in a submission match between Jericho and Undertaker, where Jericho seeks to have the Undertaker tap out to the walls of Jericho to prove his mortality, but in the end Jericho gets caught in Hell's Gate and taps out, and the Undertaker proves that he is the dead man. I think that would have been a really, really cool match. You could have had that at a WrestleMania. I think it would have been a match that people would have bought, and people would have totally seen that as a WrestleMania match. So yeah, definitely could have been a good feud, but we never got it, and we never will. So, almost a what could have been. Next set of questions from Pro Wrestling Odyssey. What's a Jericho match you thought would be great, but turned out to be bad or below average? Jericho really hasn't had a lot of bad matches, but there are a couple, I can't lie. I can't say every match he's had has been amazing. A couple come to mind. John Cena and Jericho from Survivor Series. Thought that was going to be a good match, but it really wasn't all that great. Nothing exciting. I also think about the matches he had with Bray Wyatt back in 2014. Those matches were pretty I mean, they were fine. Like, I thought they were gonna be really good. Like, I thought the Jericho Wyatt feud would really help Wyatt get out of that slump that was created when after his feud with Cena. But those matches really weren't anything special. Like, they were okay. Like, I liked them, but they really didn't do anything for me. But if I had to pick one, I would say the Asylum match with Dean Ambrose, just, at Extreme Rules a couple months ago. Not a good match at all. I mean, it was just, and I think the main problem with it was just too long. It was boring. And, an Asylum match, a steel cage with all these weapons, it shouldn't be boring. And I almost felt bad for Jericho because he took a giant thumbtack spot for what? This match was nothing. The crowd really didn't care about it all that much. It was just so long. It was 26, like 27 minutes. Who asked for that match to go that long? And I thought, after they had a good match at Payback, like a fine match. It was, again, a little long for, a mid-card match at Payback. But I thought, okay, we have some smoke and mirrors, we have a cage, we have weapons, we can have some enjoyable spots, but I don't know, the cage match just really didn't work out for either guy. None of them really looked super, super strong, and again, Jericho took this giant thumbtack spot, and I didn't care about it at all. So, a really underwhelming match, really not all that fun, not exciting, and just lackluster at best. Next question, thoughts on the gift of Jericho? Drink it in, man. Absolutely love it, man. I love that catchphrase. It's great. I love the Chris Jericho character in 2016. I just wish he had, like, those battleground flags. I wish Jericho would carry that with him. Like, that would be amazing. And just Jericho, like, sings himself to the ring, like I mentioned before. That would have been hilarious. Like, if Jericho just did anything ridiculous, I would totally be on board with it. The gift of Jericho, like, I don't even know how he came up with that. Like, well, I mean, like, I understand how. I mean, I could say, the gift of Jericholic8704, but, like, the phrase, drink it in, man, like, that is what puts it over the top. That's what I love about it so much. Favorite Jericho match from each year, 1990, was that 1995? Oh, shit, man, I can't read. I don't have my glasses on, and I can barely read these comments. 1995 to 2016. All right, so let's think about this. 1995, I'd have to say the Super J Cup with Benoit is my favorite match. Again, you said favorite, so this does not necessarily mean his best match, although that will probably be the case with most years. So, favorite match from 1995 to 2016. 1995, I will say the Super J Cup match with Benoit, a fucking classic match. I love it. One of Jericho's best matches ever, and probably my favorite Japanese match from Jericho. 1996, I'm going to think of, I think it was Heatwave 1996, the Fatal 4-Way, Shane Douglas, Pitbull number 2, Too Cold Scorpio, and Jericho, in my opinion, the best Fatal 4-Way of all time. Great, great match. Loved every second of it. It is a lengthy match. It's really, really long, but it goes by in like 2 seconds. It's a very, very good match. I love every second of it, and I love the concept of the ECW Fatal 4-Way. It's different, but, it still feels the same. So definitely a great match. 1997, I'm going to say Jericho and Guerrero from Fall Brawl 1997. Great match. One thing I'm kind of disappointed in is they really didn't use the 2 rings as much as I wanted them to. Like, that would have made this match even better. But it's still a classic technical match. Great, great moment. And I have to say this match is one of my favorites because it gave birth to my profile picture. That hilarious moment when Jericho he's in like some sort of like surfboard stretch or something, and he makes that face. I was watching that match recently, and like I've always noticed that, but when he made that face, I was like, damn, that should be my profile picture. And I took a screenshot of it, photoshopped it in, and bam, it is my new profile picture. So always a classic moment there. Love that match. 1998, I'm gonna go with Super Brawl 8, Chris Jericho versus Juventud Guerrera. Really, really fun match here. Definitely Jericho's best match in WCW, at least my favorite match from Jericho in WCW. Really, really awesome counters, really, really great moves. Again, Jericho busts out some really cool moves. And, Jericho's constant berating of Juventud Guerrera's looks on the mic as he's unmasking and he's breaking tradition of Lucha Libre. Fucking awesome. 1999, I would probably say his match with China at Armageddon. That was his first IC title win, if I'm not mistaken. And it was a good match, too. It was probably the best match on that show. Most of the Armageddon pay-per-views kind of sucked ass, but I remember that match being really good. Favorite match from 2000 would definitely be the Last Man Standing match with Triple H. Fantastic match, one of his best. And just, such a great story in that. And, like, he was really elevated by working with Triple H. And it's a really brutal match, too. In my opinion, the best Last Man Standing match ever. Really, just a fucking awesome match. 2001, now this one's so tough. It goes back and forth between the ladder match with Benoit Royal Rumble or the tag team match on Raw where Triple H tore his quad. And while I think the ladder match is one of the best matches Jericho's ever had, and while it's the better match of the two, I'm going to go with the tag team match. Jericho and Benoit versus two-man power trip on Raw. I love that match so much, and it was so exciting. The crowd was so into it. Seeing Jericho and Benoit win the titles was a great moment. And, just everything about that is tag team wrestling at its finest. 2002 might be a little bit of cheating, but I'm going to say the Elimination Chamber match. I mean, Jericho performed really well in this match. He was in it for a majority of the time, I think. After Triple H, he was in that match the longest. So it's a good, it's fine to count it as Jericho's best match of 2002. I think the Elimination Chamber match is the best Elimination Chamber match. Nothing will ever top it. 5 stars. Great, great match. And Jericho, played his part well. He was a great heel. Jericho and Triple H teaming up to take out Shawn Michaels was really cool. And seeing them turn on each other was really fun. And Jericho's elimination was cool. So many great components of that match. One of my favorite matches. And Jericho performed well in it. 2003, not a shadow of a doubt, Jericho versus Shawn Michaels from WrestleMania 19. What more can you say? It's a classic match, Jericho's best match ever, one of the best matches in WrestleMania history, one of Shawn Michaels' best matches ever, and, just a classic. 2004, I gotta think about this one for a sec, because Jericho was kind of lost in the shuffle a little bit in 2004, but I'm gonna say Jericho and Christian from WrestleMania 20. Very overlooked match, very underrated in terms of great WrestleMania matches. This is up there with some of the best. I would say 4 stars, solid. It's a very, very good match. I like the storyline. Very, very fun. The double cross at the end when Trish turns on Jericho still eats away at me to this day. Going with Christian, I was so mad as a little kid watching Trish turn on Jericho. But yeah, no, very, very fun match. 2005. I was tempted to say Jericho and Benjamin from Backlash 05 because that's a really, really good match. But I'm going to say Jericho and Cena from SummerSlam 2005 because, 1, I was there live. 2, it's a great match and it's very overlooked. No one really talks about it. One of the best matches Cena ever had. It was probably Cena's best match of his career for a really long time. Maybe until 07 with that match with HBK. But very, very good match and a great farewell match for Jericho, even though he had his official farewell match the next night on Raw before he took his hiatus. But very, very good pay-per-view send-off for Jericho. 2006 and 2000, well, no, he came back in 2007. I have to find a match for that. 2006, I'm going to say nothing because he wasn't there. 2007, I guess by default, like nothing's really coming to my mind. I mean, he came back in like November of 07, so there's not too much ground to cover. But I'm gonna say his match with Orton at Armageddon, kind of by default. There's really nothing special about it, but it's probably the only pay-per-view match he had, and the only one I can remember. I don't really remember him having any major matches on Raw in 2007. So Jericho versus Orton it is. 2008. No-brainer for me, Shawn Michaels versus Chris Jericho at No Mercy, 2008 in the ladder match for the World Heavyweight Championship. Fucking awesome match, one of the best ladder matches ever. Probably the best ladder match, like the greatest ladder match of maybe like the late 2000s. Like, I don't think there's been a ladder match that has topped it since 2008. So I will say one of the best ladder matches ever. I would say 4 3/4. Fucking amazing match. And I really like the Unforgiven match as well. Just the storytelling in that match more than anything. The action was good, but the storytelling was really, really on point. Love that match. But I'll always give the nod to the ladder match. And I mean, they had great matches in 08, Jericho and Michaels. Like, any of those matches could be considered the best. And they each had a different story element to them that made them so great. But I'm going to say the ladder match at Unforgiven. I'm not Unforgiven, No Mercy, I'm sorry. 2009, Easy one again, Chris Jericho and Rey Mysterio at the Bash 2009. Amazing match. Story behind it was great. The finish was awesome. Great action. They topped their match at Extreme Rules, which was already a really, really good match. What more could you ask for? 2010, I will say Chris Jericho and Edge from Extreme Rules 2010 in the Steel Cage rematch. This wasn't for the title, obviously, because Jericho lost it to Jack Swagger. Think about that. But a very, very good match nonetheless. A very fun cage match. Kind of goes overlooked, but then again, it kind of blended in 2010 because 2010 was just such an, just subpar, below average year that everything kind of gets lost except for the big major matches of 2010, like Shawn Michaels and Taker, Team WWF versus Nexus and stuff like that. So, stuff like this kind of gets brushed under the rug just because of the time it took, or when it took place, I should say. But this is a very good match, and I like it. 2011, Jericho was completely absent from the company. 2012, Chris Jericho versus CM Punk at WrestleMania. Very, very good match. Love it. Obviously, a lot of people like to put the Chicago Street Fight match over the Extreme Rules match. And while it's probably a better match, I just enjoy the WrestleMania match more. The grand stage of WrestleMania. I really was hyped for WrestleMania 28. I was more excited for this match than I was for the Street Fight. The build-up was fun. Everything about WrestleMania I love. So if a match takes place at WrestleMania, I'm probably going to pick that one more than any of the other ones, just because that's my personal bias. Just like the pomp and circumstance of WrestleMania often trumps other shows, even if the match quality is slightly better. I mean, if someone has a shit match at Mania and then someone has an amazing match at the next pay-per-view, obviously I'm going to pick that one. But in terms of the quality, it's about even for me for both of these matches. Maybe one match is a little better than the other, but I'm going to go with the WrestleMania match. And I like the finish, too, with Jericho tapping out. 2013, another tough one. Got to think about this for a sec. I'll think Jericho and Punk at Payback 2013. I was going to say Jericho and RVD. That would have been a good one, too. But I really like the Payback match. It might be the best one out of their three matches. I really enjoyed the Payback match. It was Punk's comeback to Chicago. So very, very fun match. It was good to see Punk beat Jericho in Chicago. But I don't know. I think I should watch the trilogy of those matches again and see which one's my favorite. The best match is probably the Extreme Rules match, but I'm really not sure because I really remember enjoying the Payback match, but I haven't watched the Payback match, I think, literally since 2013. So I'm going to have to rewatch that soon because I really enjoyed that match and I really remember liking it. 2014, damn, I'd say Jericho and Orton from Night of Champions. I thought that was a really underrated match. I really enjoyed that match. Again, that's another match like the Payback match that I haven't watched since it came out. But I definitely would go back and rewatch that because I do remember really, really enjoying that match and giving it I think I gave it 4 stars. Very, very good match. It kind of flew under the radar because both Orton and Jericho really didn't have anything to do. And I think this was Jericho's send-off for his 2014 run, which is probably the most underwhelming run he's had in the 2010s. But very, very good match. He capped it off well. The Jericho-Wyatt match on the cage was a good match, but I think Jericho-Orton was better. 2015, I think by default it has to be the 6-man tag from Night of Champions. Did he have any other matches in 2015? I can't think of any. Ooh, wait. No, I just thought about it. Jericho and Neville. Forgot about that at Beast in the East. I totally forgot about that match. So I will definitely say Jericho and Neville from Beast in the East. That almost flew right over my head. And I just thought about that at the last second. So I'll say Jericho and Neville. Very, very fun match. Good way to start the Japanese show. The Japanese crowd loved Jericho, and Jericho worked kind of a high-flying style a little bit. He brought back some of his, cruiserweight moves with Neville, which, Neville's a smaller opponent. He can do some of that stuff. Very, very fun match. Jericho ended up winning, which I was kind of shocked about, but, very, very good. And then 2016 was my favorite Jericho match so far this year. I will definitely give it to Jericho and Styles from Mania 32. Biggest Mania ever, and Jericho gets a win over AJ Styles. Did he need to win? No, he didn't, but it was still a fun match regardless. Dream Jericho match. There's several. Again, the number one for me is Jericho and Sting. Like I mentioned earlier, I think the rivalry could have been good if we had like a 1998, 1999 Sting versus a 2008 Jericho. Very, very interesting feud. But then there's also like, you could put Jericho with all the other greats that he's never really had the chance to get in the ring with in his prime. Jericho and Nakamura. Like I know Jericho and Nakamura had a house show match, and it was, like it was good. I mean, obviously, like Nakamura's great, Jericho's great, but Jericho just is not the same wrestler he used to be when in like 2000, 2001. So if we could have Jericho in his prime against Nakamura, that would be great. Jericho in his prime against Tanahashi, I think that would be a fucking awesome match. Jericho in his prime against Danielson. Jericho in his prime against Punk. Guys like that. Maybe Jericho in his prime against someone like, I don't know, Ricky Steamboat, Ric Flair. There's so many different ones. My number one will always be Sting, but I think, maybe those other runner-ups, like, Jericho in his prime against Steamboat, Nakamura, Tanahashi, Flair. Great wrestlers like that could have been really, really cool. If you could give Jericho a better title reign, when, where, and how long would it be? This is a very tough question because it's very easy for me to just say, oh, give him a title run during this month, through this month, and this year, and bada boom. But when I'm thinking about it, is like Jericho is very unlucky in the fact that like just his title reigns just never really worked out for him when it came to the timing. And he was unfortunately in the Attitude Era, if you're a babyface in the Attitude Era, you're going to get overshadowed by, Rock and Steve Austin. And Jericho was able to have a career outside of the Attitude Era, fortunately for him. But I was thinking about it, and it was like, some scenarios came into my head. If I was going to give him another title reign, I'd give him another title reign in his early WWE run. I was thinking about 2000, where maybe he could have, maybe Triple H could have kept the title at King of the Ring 2000, and then Jericho could have gone on to Fully Loaded and beat Triple H in the Last Man Standing match to win the WWE title. Maybe that would have been a good run, and he could have lost it maybe at, Unforgiven 2000 or SummerSlam 2000 to maybe The Rock, and then we could have had, and then I thought about 2001. Maybe Jericho wins that match at King of the Ring 2001 in that triple threat, and maybe he holds on to it until No Mercy, where The Rock can beat Jericho. Instead of Jericho beating The Rock at No Mercy, we can flip it, so The Rock wins the WCW title at, shit. No, that ruins my plan, because Jericho would have to win the WWE title at King of the Ring. So maybe Jericho wins the WCW title at SummerSlam. Maybe he beats Booker T for the WCW title at SummerSlam 01, holds it until No Mercy, or maybe he goes into the Survivor Series match as the WCW champion. But I think that this is the problem with the timing, because I think the dynamic of The Rock and Stone Cold being the champions of their respective teams, was a good thing, or I should say the flip-flop, because Rock was WCW champion and Stone Cold was WWE champion. So with those 2 years just really not being kind to Jericho in terms of timing, I thought about 2003. And I thought, what about this? Triple H wins the World Heavyweight Championship at Armageddon 2002 by beating Shawn Michaels. He holds on to it until WrestleMania 19, where Booker T beats him. And then Chris Jericho goes on to beat Booker T at Bad Blood 2003. And Jericho holds the title all the way through the summer, where he loses it in the Elimination Chamber match at SummerSlam 2003 against Goldberg. Would have been very, very good. Obviously, anything to break up Triple H's reign of terror. I'll do anything to do that, you know what I mean? So, I think, sure, you kind of hot potatoed the championship around a little bit, but I don't think it would have been that bad. I think Jericho versus Booker T in the main event of a Raw pay-per-view could have definitely sold tickets. Booker T was a very, very good babyface, and Jericho was really over as a heel. And Chris Jericho was genuinely the best part of Raw. So why not give the best part of Raw the World Heavyweight Championship? Maybe that was part of Jericho's appeal, is that he wasn't the champion, but yet he still stole the show. But I still think you could have given him something. I mean, he could go one-on-one with, Shawn Michaels and Booker T and even do a program with Triple H. And I mean, if we do it like he went from Bad Blood to SummerSlam, sure, he never would have had a pay-per-view title defense, but that's pretty much the entire summer. Because, they didn't have anything for July because that was a SmackDown pay-per-view. So from mid-June to late August, he's the champion. I think that would have been fine. I mean, no harm in it. It's not like Raw was booming at that point, and Jericho was a good part of Raw, so why not give him the title? And your last question, what year do you think Jericho should hang up the boots? Whenever he's ready, to be honest. I mean, Jericho, as we have seen, is still an entertaining guy. Now, I always think, like, I don't know what Jericho wants to do. And I mean, obviously, he has his band, so he probably wants to do more stuff with that. But as a wrestler, I'm fine with Jericho hanging it up this year, next year, like maybe around that time, like 2016 to 2018. But Jericho could totally stay as a manager or as some sort of general manager. I think it would be fun because Jericho is so entertaining and he's so great at being a face and a heel. He has so many doors open. I doubt he would work as some sort of agent or trainer. Jericho has enough money and he already has enough on his plate with his podcast and his band and all that. So, he might not want to stay, but I mean, if he wanted some on-camera time, he could totally be a manager. And, like, Jericho would probably still be in shape to the point where he could, like, get in the ring and take bumps. He probably wouldn't have to wrestle or anything. He wouldn't have any matches, but he could go in and, like, interfere with people and, like, get beat up to put other guys over. Just, stuff like that. ManiaxonYT asks, thoughts on the Jericho and Christian Tao segment? One of the best segments in Raw history. Fucking hilarious. There are two, like, classic lines from that. One, I love when Christian tells Jericho that they need to get their clothes back because the little general's going into retreat, and then all of a sudden you hear JR on commentary go, "Oh, the little general!" Like, he was so hyped for that moment. That was hilarious. But my favorite part, the thing I continuously laugh at, and this is me and my stupid sense of humor, in the very beginning, when they're in the dressing room and Jericho and Christian first come out of the shower together and they're in the towels and they don't know where their bags are, and Jericho goes up to Hurricane and he says, "How about you, fungus head?" I died. I died every time I watch that and I hear, "What about you, fungus head?" Fucking hilarious. I don't know, like, who came up with that line, but it's so funny. And again, this is me with my stupid sense of humor, where, like, these stupid insults that wouldn't insult a 5-year-old make me laugh more than anything. That was hilarious. That was legitimately funny. And then when Hurricane's like, "Someone stole your luggage," and then Christian was like, "You're a crime fighter. Why didn't you stop them?" So many great moments. And I mean, honestly, the part I liked the least was, like, the payoff when the Dudleys are, like, throwing their stuff. I mean, that part was okay. And they pull out the ass cream. Like, that was funny. Like, haha. And then, like, Jericho's like, "You think it's funny throwing my Christian's jar of ass cream?" Like, that was funny. And Spike, ripping their towels off. That was funny too. But, like, to me, the true highlight of that segment is them backstage looking for their bags and them discovering that their stuff had been stolen. That was the true comedy in that segment. Best Jericho matches in WCW. As I said before, Jericho and Hoovy. At Super Brawl, Jericho and Guerrero. I'm a big fan of Jericho and Malenko from, was it Uncensored 1998. He was also in a really, really good 6-man tag match at Clash of the Champions, I believe 34, it was Jericho, Guerrero, and Super Calo versus Conan Laparca, and I believe Jerry Lynn. That was a very, very good match, very underrated, doesn't really get talked about a lot, but a very, very good, fun six-man tag match. Definitely worth your time, definitely worth checking out, but a very, very fun match. And he also had a really, really good match at Halloween Havoc with Raven. It's very short, and it's the opener, but it's a very, very fun match. Definitely worth checking out. And your next question, have you watched Jericho's New Japan run? Most of it, I have. I have watched a lot of his wrestling and romance stuff, too. That's also very good. Like, I believe that tape with Ultimo, he had a match with Ultimo, that tape got to the States, and people started hiring Jericho at the States because of that. But no, definitely fun stuff. His Super J Cup match with Benoit, one of the best. He's had a lot of great matches in Japan. Ironically, though, I feel like a lot of his great matches a lot of great singles matches came during Wrestling and Romance. But he was in a lot of good 8-man tags and 6-man tags. Best moment of the Jericho-Stephanie rivalry. So many great moments, really. Like, so many classic zingers. I love the Jericho. They could not get away with what they said back then. Now people would have been wanting to burn Jericho on a stake if they had heard what he was saying about Stephanie. I think my favorite line was when Jericho showed the before and after Stephanie got her boob job. I think that was hilarious. And he said, "Let the boobies hit the floor," in reference to the Drowning Pool song. That was awesome. And then I loved when Jericho, one of the lines is like, "A SummerSlam to you is a quickie on a hot August night," or something like that. That was very funny. And when he started, it was during SummerSlam '01. It was when Jericho was like, he said he hadn't beaten Rhino before, and he's like, "But there's a first time for everything," because everyone remembers their first time. Like Stephanie McMahon, she remembers her first time with the captain of the football team, and the baseball team, and the basketball team, and the volleyball team, and the chess club, and the Latin club, and like, he just started going on and on and on, and that was always funny. Again, like stuff like that. I mean, yeah, it's probably bad. It definitely shouldn't. It definitely wouldn't fly today, and I don't mean that in a bad way. But like, just stuff like that is just, I don't know. I always look back on it and I'm like, I don't know. Like, I feel bad for laughing because it is really bad. But at the same time, it's entertainment. He doesn't really mean it. Like, I think that's something that like a lot of people like get really sensitive about. And I understand if it offends you and everything, but like, he doesn't mean it. And like, like Jericho does not actually think Stephanie McMahon is a slut. We all know Stephanie McMahon isn't a slut. We all know that. It's just for fun. It's just, it's something like, it's harmless. Jericho and Stephanie, they don't hate each other. They were all okay with it. Stephanie McMahon played along. She played along with the role perfectly. And of course, I can't forget him throwing the pie in her face. That was hilarious as well. Diesel 101 Raw. As how awesome would a 1999 to 2001 Chris Jericho versus 2005, 2006 Edge with Lita be? That'd be fucking awesome, dude. I never really even thought about that rivalry with, those two guys in that potential time frame. That would have been really awesome because Edge would have been a great heel for Jericho as a babyface. And we all know Jericho would have made some smart ass comments towards Lita and would have been fucking hilarious. And Jericho could make fun of Edge too and all that stuff. So like they had so much dirt on them, especially with the whole, cheating on Matt Hardy thing. They had so much material for Jericho to just, be able to manipulate and, to make fun of him in his promos and everything. And the history too, just, both being Canadians, they can bring up that. And there's a lot of history between the two and very, they were in the prime of their in-ring wrestling. Jericho, 1999 to 01, that was probably his peak years as a wrestler. And Edge, 05, 06, he was really starting to get a good singles style. I mean, Edge was always a great wrestler, but as a singles competitor, he really started to get into his groove around 05, 06. Not to mention, this is post-neck surgery Edge, so he had to, kind of adjust to a new ring style, which suited him well and worked for him. But yeah, this feud could have been really awesome. I mean, like, Jericho-Edge feud, I mean, they had their feud in 2010, but I mean, again, like a timing thing. Different shows, especially around 2002, but they did have that really, they had that really good cage match on SmackDown. It was a really, really good match. So, I mean, that was probably the closest thing we ever got to it. In terms of 2001 Edge, I think Jericho made a comment to Edge. I think like Jericho faced Edge on like a 2000 episode of Raw. And he made a comment like, "No one knows more about beating," and he made like a jack off motion than you, Edge, and that was really, really funny. So I mean, stuff like that would have been really hilarious. Like he could have said that about Lita, like no one knows more about beating than you after like the live sex show, and like Jericho could have crashed that live sex show and would have been really, really funny. So a lot of potential great moments if stuff like that could have aligned. If Owen Hart was still alive, do you think that he would have been Chris Jericho's first official feud? Potentially. He definitely could have been. He would have been a really great wrestler for Jericho to showcase his abilities. Again, like a history, Jericho being from the Heart Dungeon and everything. Definitely could have been good. And Owen could have been a great heel for Jericho to get a win over. Definitely could have happened. And Owen is he was a great wrestler, and he would have really helped Jericho. And Owen, even though he was never WWE champion, was a really solid like name. Like people knew the name Owen Hart, and he had the Hart last name. He had the lineage on his side, so he really could have elevated Jericho if he were still alive when Jericho got to the company. It would have been great to see. Would have been a great match. And I know Jericho said he was a big fan of Owen Hart growing up, so I'm sure it would have been nice for Jericho to wrestle him. Would you rather seen The Rock versus Chris Jericho for the WWE title in the main event of SummerSlam instead of Rock being inserted to the Angle and Triple H match? Yeah, no, I agree. And you also add that feud is overrated in my opinion. I can see why you'd think that. Kind of is a little bit. But yeah, no, definitely. I think The Rock was really out of place in that match, and that match kind of fell flat in my opinion. With the names Rock, Triple H, and Kurt Angle, you think that match would have been fucking amazing, but it really wasn't all that great. But yeah, no, Jericho really could have benefited from a match with The Rock. He didn't even have to win, but it would have been a really, really good match. And I mean, that would have been Jericho's first rub with The Rock, his first rub with a major star. I mean, he wrestled Triple H, but like, as we all know, like Triple H was a big name in the Attitude Era, but when it came to like mega star, he was nowhere near as big as The Rock or Steve Austin. So in this case, Jericho would be facing The Rock. It would have been huge for him. Would have been absolutely amazing for Jericho to get that opportunity. And again, The Rock just did not fit in that triple threat match, and it didn't work all that well. I mean, we would have missed out on the classic of Jericho and Benoit in the 2 out of 3 Falls match, but I think I would have forgiven that since we had 2 great Jericho-Benoit matches a couple months prior at Backlash and Judgment Day. So no complaints from me if that were to happen. How much do you hate the fact that WCW couldn't even do a Bret Hart versus Chris Jericho match? Me personally, gets under my skin. Yeah, no, I can totally feel where you're coming from that. Similar to Owen Hart thing, they have the history of Jericho being the last survivor of, the Hart family dungeon. That's the name they gave him in ECW, but not WCW. I mean, Jericho was just, I don't want to say a lone man on the totem pole, but like 2 different worlds. And I mean, WCW mismanaged Bret Hart to an unrecognizable degree. And I mean, when Owen Hart died and they had the Owen Hart tribute match, I believe Jericho was still in the company because that was May of 1999, and Jericho's contract with WCW wasn't up until July or June, one of those dates. But they did the match with Benoit, which I'm not complaining about. I'm not saying Jericho deserved to be in that over Benoit, but that was still a good match. But definitely they could have done something with Bret and Jericho. It would have been a fantastic match. It would have been a great rub for Jericho to work with Bret Hart. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, they haven't done anything like that. But again, Jericho was just, I don't know, in 1998, which is, Bret came over to WCW in 1997. And around 1998 is when Jericho really started to get going as a heel. It didn't even have to be like an amazing match or anything. It didn't have to be something like, like a perfectly built up 5-star match with, 2 even wrestlers. It could have been like Jericho biting off more than he could chew. Not in like a burial type of way, but Jericho was the comedic heel. He was funny, he was dancing, he was doing all of his crazy stuff. He could come out and just interrupt Bret Hart or something like that and like kickstart a feud where Jericho just has no respect for Bret Hart. He doesn't care. He's so wrapped up in himself, he doesn't realize what a great star Bret Hart is, you know what I mean? So I think that if they did that sort of dynamic, that would have been really, really cool. Finally, do you ever wish Jericho had a TNA run in 05-07 when he was gone / before he came back? No, I really don't think he needed to go to TNA. I do remember, I think Jericho said, like, when he left in 2005, on his website, he posted a picture of himself and the TNA logo above it, and he did that just as a troll to, like, watch all the fans, like, freak out. Like, oh my god, Jericho's going to TNA. I mean, it would have been cool in hindsight. I mean, I don't think he needed to, but like in terms of like dream match opponents, like a Jericho, like an 05 Jericho versus AJ Styles, fucking awesome. Jericho versus Daniels, PD Williams, Samoa Joe, and even like some guys like Sting and Kurt Angle and Jeff Jarrett, Jeff Hardy, stuff like that. Like, Jeff Hardy was still, he would have caught him if he came in 05. I think. I'm pretty sure that's how it went with Jeff Hardy. Oh well. But yeah, no, like younger guys, like I think I would have loved to seen Styles, Daniels, Samoa Joe, PD Williams. I'm trying to think of more, like, even guys like, the Motor City Machine Guns, like a Chris Sabin, like if he formed a tag team with someone, they went against Beer Money or Motor City Machine Guns, stuff like that. I think that would have been really, really cool. But if you look past the dream match scenario, Jericho did not belong in TNA. He does not need it. I mean, even though 05 and 07 were still good years for TNA, Jericho didn't need to go there. And if Jericho went there, he would have been pushed to the top. He would have been TNA champion. And he didn't need that. And the whole point of his break was he was burnt out on wrestling. He wasn't burnt out on WWE. He was burnt out on wrestling. And he wanted time away from wrestling so he could rejuvenate and be better. Even if it was a brief stint, like he came in 2006 for 6 months. I still don't think it would have been worth it. I think it's better. Jericho stayed with WWE. He stayed loyal. He didn't go to TNA. And who knows? TNA might have fucked him up. You never know. I doubt they would have, or they would have at least taken him seriously, considering he's an ex-WWE wrestler. But, overall, I don't think he needed to go to TNA at all. It would have been cool to see him wrestle certain guys. Yeah, sure. But, no, he didn't need to go to TNA. I'm glad he didn't. Osmic Jizzles asked the following questions. Does he need one last title run? No, Jericho does not need one more title run. As I've said before, if he wants to challenge for a title, I'm totally fine with that. As long as he doesn't win, I really don't think he needs to win the title. It wouldn't hurt anything, to be honest, but the title, I always feel like the title should be reserved for people who are still actively part of the company. There are special exceptions, like a Brock Lesnar. I was totally fine with him being WWE champion because Brock Lesnar, even though he's part-timer, he's the biggest draw. You know what I mean? He's a special case. Jericho doesn't have the drawing power that Brock Lesnar has, simply because, Jericho's just there more often, and Jericho doesn't have the mean streak Lesnar has. He doesn't have the look that Brock Lesnar has, so stuff like that. So Jericho really wouldn't be a good fit for champion. If they wanted to give Jericho another IC title run or a US title run, I wouldn't be against that. I would be fine with that, actually. It would probably raise the prestige of the belt a little bit. But, I don't think he needs any title runs. Then you asked his best title reign. Huh, alright. Well, I have to think about this for a second, but when I think about his best title reign, now you just said title reign, so that doesn't necessarily mean world title reign, because when I think about Jericho's world title runs, they have their ups and their downs, but a majority of them aren't the best. But when I think about it, there's one title reign that sticks out above the rest, and that was Chris Jericho's 113-day Cruiserweight Championship reign. Jericho won the belt from Rey Mysterio at Sold Out, and then it just started a snowball of perfect Jericho moments, like great Jericho moments. For instance, after Jericho beat Mysterio, he started beating that's when he had his great match with Juventud Guerrera, which is, in my opinion, his best WCW match. So, that's automatically bonus points. But then Jericho started the funny gimmick of when he, collected mementos of his opponent. He had Mysterio's knee brace, I think, Disco Inferno's headband, Juventud's mask, stuff like that. Just so stupid, but so funny. And then he started working with Dean Malenko, and he became the man of 1,004 holds. And that was probably the greatest promo he's ever cut in his life. The 1,004 holds promo is fucking hilarious. Amazing stuff. And then, it ended in great fashion too. It ended when he had that battle royal and he introduced every single opponent. And it was hilarious because he insulted every single one of them. That's priceless. That shit was so funny. So he was on the top of his game. He was having great matches and he was having funny moments. He made some of the best moments in the history of WCW and himself. Great times and a great title run. It's better than all of his other world title runs and his intercontinental title runs, even the tag team title runs. Best reign has got to be the Cruiserweight Championship in 1998. His best match from each year of his career since 1998. All right, so I did favorite, but now I got to do best. All right, so 1998, I'm going to say Jericho and Juvi. 1999, he had some good matches with Saturn, but pretty uneventful year for Jericho. I'll say his match with Chyna. He really did. There really weren't a lot of great Jericho matches in 1999. 2000, Chris Jericho and Triple H from Fully Loaded 2000. 2001, Jericho and Benoit from the Royal Rumble 2001. 2002, I'm going to say Elimination Chamber. If you want a best singles match, Jericho and Triple H, Judgment Day in the Hell in a Cell. 2003, Jericho and Michaels from Mania 19. 2004, I'm going to say Jericho and Christian from Mania 20. God, he really didn't have that many great matches in 2004 now that I think about it. God, but he was just stuck in mid-card hell. He really didn't have a lot of chances to. But anyway, 2005, him and Cena at SummerSlam. 2007, by default, him and Orton at Armageddon. 2008, Jericho and Michaels at No Mercy in the ladder match. 2009, Jericho and Mysterio at the Bash. 2010, I'll say Jericho and Edge in the cage, although Jericho and Evan Bourne at Fatal 4-Way was a really good match, but I'll say the cage match. 2012, Jericho and Punk at Mania. 2013, Jericho and Punk at Payback. 2014, Jericho and Orton at Night of Champions. 2015, by default, Jericho and Neville from Beast in the East. And 2016, Jericho and Styles at WrestleMania 32. And finally, best tag team partner, no doubt for me, gotta be Christian. Hilarious. They had such great chemistry, so many funny moments. The towel segment, always dissing Canada and stuff like that. Very, very fun tag team. Great heels too, great comedic heels. Comedic heels that also had offense. They were legitimately a good tag team, and they seemed like they were best bros and everything. Very, very fun tag team. And great partner. I mean, he did have great partners, Benoit, Big Show, Edge for that short period. They were great partners for Jericho, but I think him and Christian just clicked because they have very similar sense of humor, similar styles. Everything just clicked with them. Next set of questions from Tyler O Verstreet. What's your favorite Chris Jericho moment? Now there's a lot. There's a lot of favorite Jericho moments. 3 come to mind, but I'll give you a definitive one. Probably number 3 would be his initial heel turn in 2008 against Shawn Michaels, the highlight reel segment. That was a fucking awesome promo, a great segment, terrific mic work from Jericho, a great heel turn. As I mentioned before, the meaning behind the heel turn meant so much more. It was great. I loved every second of it. I also love his debut when the Millennium Clock hits 0 and he interrupts The Rock and he has the dueling promo and he has all the great one-liners and everything. But if I had to pick one, favorite Jericho moment will always be Man of 1004 Holds promo. Absolutely hilarious, iconic in every sense of the word. Just that whole line. You claim to be a man of 1,000 holds, but I counted, and you know about 60. But I know 1,004, and I wrote them all down. Here we go. And then how every other hold was armbar. Fucking hilarious. Like, that's just another example of Jericho just getting it. He knows what's funny. He knows what people think would be funny. He knows what wrestling fans want to see, and that was true comedy. I loved every second of that. Do you think a Christian Jericho and Edge stable could have worked? Yeah, it definitely could have worked. I remember in 2002 they did the Un-American stable where they had Christian, Test, and Lance Storm. I feel like if you might have swapped Lance Storm and Test out for Jericho and Edge, you could have had like a legit heel staple. And like the Un-Americans, while they were a fine heel act, they really didn't have any sort of like threat. I mean, they did win the tag team titles, but like they really weren't like a force that really seemed like a threat to the WWE. They kind of just seemed like a bunch of, rebels just talking shit about the country they were in. You know what I mean? It really didn't feel like it had a big main event status, if you know what I mean. I feel like the Un-Americans, maybe call them something different. Maybe they are anti-America, but if you had Jericho, Edge, and Christian, that could have been like a 2000 Shield, very similar to that. And I think you could have had them each playing distinct roles, but, maybe not make it so comedic. I think make it more serious. Like, they can have comedic moments to it because Jericho, Edge, and Christian are funny guys, but especially, I think I would have formed the stable around like 2002. Not sometime around like 2000 when Jericho was a comedic character and Edge and Christian were very funny. But maybe around 2002 when they all started kind of getting a little more serious. I think that could have been a really, really cool stable. I mean, a comedic stable in the year 2000 would have been just as great too. And even like a heel veteran stable in like 2010, 2011 could have been fun too. But I think 2002 would have been the best time for that because they all would have been like the prime of their careers athletically, and they all would have been, working towards a main event level, which they could have gotten through this stable. Because if you put main eventers against them, maybe like, Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, Triple H, Undertaker, those guys, they could really have elevated Jericho, Edge, and Christian. Question 3, do you think WWE could have done a better job utilizing Jericho? Of course. They could have done a better job. The thing about it is Jericho I don't think he ever had good timing with his WWE run. The only time where I really feel like I can justly say Jericho should have been pushed as the top heel/face was around like 2003 when during the brand extension, because Jericho was one of those guys, I think, where WWE was never going to put him in the top spot unless the brand, he was one of those guys that benefited from the brand extension. He was going to get those special chances because of the two separate rosters. In the Attitude Era, you know, no matter how, I think Jericho is a better wrestler than Stone Cold Steve Austin and a better wrestler than The Rock. But let's be real here, Jericho is nowhere near the star that The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin are. And when Jericho came to WWE in 1999, he came in during the hottest point of WWE in the 90s. You know, Austin and Rock were on top of the world. And in 2000, Austin and Rock on top of the world. 01, Austin and Rock on top of the world. It wasn't until 2002 where they kind of started to slow down, and then you had the new fresh faces. You know, Batista and John Cena started forming into new faces. Now, granted, they didn't become big-time faces till 2005 when Jericho was on his way out for his hiatus. But, you know, you had guys like Angle and Triple H. Like, they just had a top priority in the company because they were put in a bigger spot than Jericho was during the Attitude Era. It's just unfortunate for Jericho because I'm not saying WWE used him incorrectly. And I mean, they always could have used him more, but like, it's just a matter of how over was he. And Jericho was over. I mean, the crowd loved Jericho as a face and they hated him as a heel, but there was always someone more. At least, you know, for majority of his career. I mean, when he came back in 2008, he was able to establish himself as, I would say in 2008, Jericho was the top heel in that company. No one was a bigger heel than Chris Jericho, and I think that was pretty much his only taste of being a true top guy in the company. I mean, in 2002, yeah, he was champion, but I mean, the story behind, like, going into WrestleMania 18, you know, his story, he was in the third row. He was a third wheel. He wasn't anything special in that storyline. It was all about Triple H and Stephanie McMahon, who were bigger stars in the Attitude Era than Chris Jericho was. So, yes, they could have utilized him better, but the cards were stacked against him from the get-go. It didn't matter how great of a wrestler he was. It didn't matter how over he got. He wasn't going to get as over as Rock or Steve Austin. And then WWE also just has their favorites. And I'm not saying they bury Jericho and they don't like him. WWE loves Jericho. You know, they kept him around for this long. They gave him opportunities. They gave him chances and all that stuff. So I'm not saying WWE hates Jericho, but they prefer someone like Triple H. You know, they want Shawn Michaels as a utility veteran in the main event. You know, they preferred Jericho in the mid-card around like 2004, 2005. You know what I mean? So, yes, he could have been utilized better. But I can't say WWE didn't use him correctly, if that makes sense. Like, I'm going to say yes and no. Because it's a matter of who he was with and who was in the company with him. And I mean, as of right now, you know, there are other wrestlers, like in 2016, Jericho is just going to be another act because there are wrestlers who are more over than him. I mean, when he was wrestling in 2014, 2013, and 2012, Daniel Bryan was more over than him. CM Punk was more over than him. The Shield was more over than him. And that's not an insult against him, but it's just, when you become a veteran, more up-and-comers are going to become more popular than you. And thus, you can't be used in high-profile situations when you're not going to get the biggest fan reaction and you're not selling the most tickets. And that's just a matter of fact. Jericho didn't sell tickets in 2000, 2001. Sure, people might have paid to see the Jericho match, but they were there to see the big stars like Austin and Rock. So it never really worked out for Jericho in that sense of becoming a top guy, just because there was always someone above him that WWE favored or the fans favored more. Again, the only time I really think Jericho could have been used better was around 2003, 2004, 2005. I mean, at the end, they gave him the WWE Championship program with Cena. But in 2004, when he was just floundering, like, he definitely could have been in a main event picture. He could have been maybe paired with Benoit for a world title match. I think that the best time for that would have been Bad Blood 04. Jericho and Benoit in a match, and then you had HBK and Triple H in the Hell in a Cell. That would have been a double main event. That would have been kick-ass. But, you know, 2003... you know, he was the best part of Raw, and he could have been used as a heel champion. 2004, he definitely could have been in the main event picture. So I definitely think 2003, 2004 are the times where Jericho was probably... 2003, he was utilized well. 2004, he was not utilized well at all. And I think that was probably not a low point in his career, but a time where he definitely he deserved a lot more. Number 4, buy or sell 1995 to 2005 Jericho or 2008-2010 Jericho. No brainer for me, as much as I love the Honest Man gimmick, and even though that is what gave Jericho the highlights of his career, it's what made him a top guy in WWE, it's what solidified him as a legend. 1995 to 2005 Jericho. Can't get any better than that. I absolutely love Jericho. The Y2J character, the rebellious rock star character. It resonated so well with me. That's what I looked up to. That's what I wanted to be. Because, like, I was, like, the rebellious rock star that Chris Jericho was. Like, I looked at him when I was, like, in kindergarten, first and second grade, and I wanted to be just like him. But the problem was I was a little kid with anxiety who never wanted to get in trouble because I was afraid I'd get yelled at. So I couldn't be Chris Jericho, because if I said half the things Jericho said to wrestlers, to my mom or my dad or my teachers, I would have gotten my ass beat. So, like, I couldn't actually be him, but he was what I always wanted to be. I always wanted to be the rebellious kid. But of course, I'm a little kid with social anxiety that doesn't want to get in trouble and doesn't want people to dislike him, so I could never say anything bad to anyone. So, it holds a lot of sentimental value to me. I love the Y2J character, and I love everything about him. I love all of his insults. I love his cocky attitude. I love his swagger. I love the persona. Everything about the classic Y2J character I love. So I always got to buy him over the Honest Man gimmick. Even though it might be better for Jericho's career, I don't care. I love the Y2J character. Your final question: when Jericho came back in 2007, what was your first reaction? I love that you asked this question, because I got a story for all of you. I would watch Raw every Monday. Every single Monday. And it didn't matter. What I was doing, what grade I was in, I was watching Raw. Around kindergarten, first grade, I didn't have a TV in my room. And I watched it in my brother's room, and my bedtime was like 9:45, so I'd watch, the first couple minutes of Raw, match or two, and then I'd have to go to bed. And then my brother would tell me what happened on Raw the next day on our way to school. But around second grade, my brother got a new TV in his room, and I got a hand-me-down TV. A little tube TV from like 1995, but it got cable, so that's all that mattered. And I was able to watch Raw in my own room, and my bedtime was still quote-unquote 10 o'clock, but because I was a fucking badass in second grade, I stayed up past 10 o'clock. Yeah, I was pretty legit. So I would watch Raw when my parents thought I was asleep. My parents probably knew I was watching Raw, even though I was supposed to be in bed. They just were like, whatever, just let this stupid kid have his wrestling. But I'd watch Raw, and I'd stay up every Monday till 11, and I'd wake up the next morning just fine. Maybe I was a little more tired than I usually was, but I'd always want to get my homework done on Monday just to watch Raw and watch the whole thing. Again, I was a big time Raw guy. I was never a SmackDown guy. I was always a Raw guy. And then I'd watch it every day, and that was my Monday ritual. I'd come home from school, eat my snack, do my homework, eat my dinner, and then bam, I was in my bed, ready for Raw to start at 9 o'clock. So I would watch it, and then I'd always be able to make it through. I'd always be able to make it through the entire show from 9 to 11. And one day, 5th grade, November 17th, 2007, I believe that was the date of Jericho's return, they were advertising the whole Randy Orton pass the torch ceremony, and I was just like, oh, whatever. And like, I was yawning. It was 10 o'clock or so, and I was like, oh my God, I'm getting so tired. I'm like, I don't want to miss Raw though. Like I want to see Randy Orton get past the torch, yada, yada, yada. And then I was just like, screw it. I need to go to bed. I'm so tired. I can't stay awake. I tried, but I fell asleep with the TV on. I woke up the next morning and my TV was on, and it was muted, but it was still on. And I was like, oh, damn. And I turned off the TV, and I went to school, and, I was at school the entire day. Nothing happened. And I came home. My older brother, who, he is 8 years older than me, so he was in high school at this time. Actually, no, I was in 5th grade. So my brother was in college. Shit. He was in college, and I think he came home for the weekend or something. Or maybe it was during his like Thanksgiving break or something, because that would have made sense. It was like late November. So maybe it was during Thanksgiving break. He was with us, and he was like, oh my God, did you hear Jericho came back? And I was like, what? What are you talking about? He's like, Jericho came back on Raw. Did you hear? And at this point, my brother really wasn't watching wrestling as much. My brother would get back into wrestling when the network came out, but he knew how much I loved Jericho. And he was like, oh my God, you missed it? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, you dumbass, you missed the whole thing. Go on their website. and I went on their website and I watched the day his return, and I would have flipped the fuck out because I mean I wasn't reading the I wasn't reading any websites. I wasn't going on to any websites, reading any spoilers or reading anything about Jericho. When Jericho left in 2005, I thought he was done. I was like, fuck, my favorite wrestler. I was only 8 years old. I'm like, my favorite wrestler's gone? Dude, what else do I have to look forward to? So I thought Jericho was done. I honestly thought he was. Like, I had heard he might come back, but I was like, screw it. They're probably not telling the truth. Unless Jericho says it himself, I'm not going to believe it. I thought he was gone. But no, apparently he wasn't. Tyler Clem asked the following questions. Favorite entrance theme? Like I said before, classic Break the Walls Down. You can't beat it. I mean, the King of the World theme is probably a better song, but it's so iconic, so memorable, like sketched into my mind. It's forever ingrained. I love the Jericho theme. It's like statistically and like from an instrumental standpoint, from a lyrical standpoint, it's pretty stupid, but I love it. So I can't knock it anymore. It's got to be my favorite. Do you think he will get another title run? I do not think he will get another world title run. As far as tag team, intercontinental, US, I'm not sure. I don't know. With the brand split, maybe Jericho will get one of the titles. I doubt it. But that could very much happen. It could happen. I wouldn't put it past WWE. I don't think it would have been a horrible idea, but I don't think it is the best idea. I'm perfectly fine with him getting a mid-card title again, and I'm fine with him even being a tag team champion. But as far as WWE champion or, Raw SmackDown champion with this new brand split, I don't see a reason. I don't see a reason for it to happen. Do you like him better as a heel or a face? Oh my God, this is a really hard question because I go back and forth all the time. When I think of face Jericho, it was face Jericho, really. Like, that is so etched in my mind of like why I love the Y2J character. It was everything I wanted to be. I always wanted to be rambunctious. I always wanted to be the guy with the nice cool clothes with the cool long hair and everything like that. But I was at a Catholic school, so I'd have my hair short all the time. But I have to say heel Jericho. And the reason I say heel is because when Jericho's a face, and while his face shtick is great, he's kind of always been the same baby face in terms of, at least for WWE. Like in WCW, he was the clean, squeaky good guy face. But as a face in WWE, he was always the same. He was the rebellious rock star, full of zingers, full of snappy comebacks and quick one-liners, which is fine. I am totally not hating on that. I love that about him. But as a heel, over his career, he's had so many different heel personas. He was the 1998 comedic heel. Completely over the top, so stupid, making stupid references, collecting his opponent's, mementos, and Man of 1,004 Holds, conspiracy victim. That is fucking hilarious. And then in 2001, he became like an egomaniac, totally obsessed with himself, and like completely over the top in his love for himself, almost like a narcissist. In 2003, he was such an asshole to everyone, and he only cared about himself, and he was, so just so stuck up and so full of himself. And then like in 2008, he just said, forget all of that, and he became a completely different person. So there's so many different elements of Jericho's heel character that makes it so unique. And while his typical face shtick is great, and I love it, he has so much more depth as a heel because he's explored more as a heel. As a face, he has his usual thing, which is fine again. But as a heel, he just has so much more depth to him. So I'm going to always say heel Jericho. And as which heel persona I prefer, I mean, there's the stuck-up narcissist of, 2001 to 2003. There's the comedic gimmick of 1998. And there's the honest man of 2008 to 2010. I would say my favorite, it's a tie between heel 1998 Jericho, over-the-top comedic gimmick, and the Y2J narcissist. You know what I mean? I don't know. It's just, there's so many great moments between the two, and there's so many different elements of each that I like. I love Jericho's comedy in 1998, but I love how much of an asshole he was in 01, 03. That's what made him so, like, lovable for me, at least. I mean, maybe that's why, just because as someone who, I mean, like my friends will agree, like I'm such a goody goody. I'm such a goody two shoes. You know, I'll always be honest. I'll always do the right thing. I never get in trouble. Like I'm always such a good person. Like I never let like my friends copy my homework and stuff like that. Like I was such a, like if you were like a rebellious kid in class, I would totally be the narc. You know, I was such a teacher's pet. Everything about that, like heel Jericho was everything I wanted to be but couldn't because I was so scared to like get on my, and there's nothing wrong. Please, I'm not endorsing being an asshole. I would not change my goody two shoes-ness for the world. I love being a teacher's pet. I love being, the goody goody because it never gets me in trouble. And I have such a clean record. That's why I'm a resident assistant. Anyway, enough about me. I think that's just what I love so much about the heel Y2J gimmick of just how full of himself he was and how much of an asshole he was and how much confidence he had. So I'll definitely say if I had to pick one gun to my head, I'll probably pick heel Y2J, but just by a hair is the 1998 gimmick. That was the funniest stuff he ever did, and that's the comedy I like to bring out in my acting, like in comedic acting. I sometimes channel the 1998 Jericho. But again, both are pretty much tied. I love both of them equally. Do you like him better with long hair or short hair? Dude, long live long-haired Jericho. You can't beat that. I mean, his short hair was fine, but dude, long-haired Jericho, especially when he would just like fuck it up, like in WCW, like when he probably just like took Moose in his hand and just waved it in his hair and just said, fine, that's what it is. And when he had it in the upright ponytail, and like that stuff was just so over the top and so stupid, but it was so hilarious. Long live long-haired Jericho, man. That's the only way to have Jericho. And finally, favorite tag team partner. As I said, Christian, fucking hilarious. They had so much chemistry together. Similar styles, similar sense of humor, great segments, especially that towel segment. Fucking awesome. Love the Christian Jericho tag team. Or Zeus147 asked the following questions. First, in terms of in-ring skill and mic work, what is Jericho's best overall gear? I would have to say it's always a toss-up because I think of all the great years he's had. Part of me wants to say 1998. Part of me wants to say 2000. Part of me wants to say 2001. Part of me wants to say 2003, 2008. Those are like his top 5 years, in my opinion. It's really hard to decide on just one. But if I had to decide on one, I'd probably say 2001. That'd probably have to be it. And like I go back and forth all the time, but I think 2001 has to be it. He's had some of his best matches in 01. And he really came into his own as a main eventer in that time. You know, he really started getting over with the people, his jokes and everything, and his feud with Stephanie really took off, and he became such like a rebellious rock star kind of guy that the fans wanted to be around, and they wanted to see him win, and they loved him, and they loved him when he spoke. You know, all of his interactions with The Rock, and, you know, Kurt Angle, and Triple H, and Stephanie McMahon, and all those people, like, and he formed the tag team with Benoit. He had the great ladder match with Benoit in 01. He had a great match with The Rock, which is one of the best matches that doesn't really get talked about a lot. I mean, people love it and everything, but it's really one of the best matches ever. He won his first title in 01. He became the undisputed champion in 01. So many great things happened to him, and he was a great wrestler in the process. He was having some of the best matches in that era of 2001. You know, he was having some of the best matches, best moments, best promos. He was killing it. And this is probably his best year. And, you know, he hit his peak. And he was only, what, like maybe 30 years old at the time? You know, he was still young. He still was in his prime athletically. And he was doing great. And he was over. And that was the most important part. Next, why is Jericho your favorite wrestler? Now, I have answered this, you know. He was the best part of Raw when I was watching Raw. But, you know, I thought I can think about it more. You know, why has Jericho remained my favorite wrestler? I'm going to alter your question a little bit so I can give you some more answers. You know what I mean? I got you covered. So why has Jericho remained my favorite wrestler? 2 reasons. One, he knows how to stay over. You know what I mean? He knows what people want to hear. He knows what people want to see. And like, think about 2016. He could have been doing his same old shtick. He could have been coming out with the same pose, with the same countdown, with the same gear. But instead, he has new catchphrases. He has the goddamn scarf, which is so awesome. I love the scarf. Like, you know how great that is? Like, it's so simple. He's like, I'm just gonna wear a scarf to the ring. Why? Because no one else does it. And people notice it. And people are like, why is this guy wearing a scarf to the ring? That's stupid. But you know what? It works. I just realized Alberto Del Rio also wears a scarf to the ring, but he doesn't wear it as well as Jericho does. And like he can make the tiniest little portion of his character, one tiny thing about him, so humongous. Like the phrase stupid idiot. That's such a minuscule phrase, but he says it to such a point where it's just so over with the crowd. And the same thing with the scarf. It's just an article of clothing, a little piece you wear around your neck, but all of a sudden it means so much more. And not only that, but Jericho understands when he himself is stale. Like in '05, I love Jericho, but he really was floundering and there was nothing special about him. He was just becoming a guy, and he knew, and well, for one, he was burnt out. He knew he needed to take a break, but he also knew that taking that break would help his character. And he said himself in '07 when he came back, he was getting like a, oh yeah, cool, Jericho's back. But he was doing the exact same thing. There was nothing new about him. He had shorter hair, sure, but there was nothing special. There was nothing new. And then he became the honest man. He became the wise man. He became the suit-wearing, slow-talking heel. And now he discovered something new. There's something new about him, a new element. He changed his entrance. He wasn't going to do his pose anymore. He changed his gear. He got a new finisher. You know, it's stuff like that that just really make him stand the test of time and give him longevity and all that. There are some wrestlers who just refuse to change, who do the same old shit year after year after year, expecting the people to still care. And that works for some people. Some people stay over so much that they can do the same thing for years and never have to evolve. But Jericho has evolved, and it has helped him exponentially. Another reason why Jericho has remained my favorite is because of 1998 heel Jericho. I am so upset that I was only a year old during Jericho's heel run. Some of his best work, some of the funniest things I've ever seen in wrestling come from heel Jericho in 1998. If you guys want a snippet of what I am like if you were just ever sitting there wondering, like, damn, if I knew Jericholic8704 in real life, what would he be like? I am heel Jericho 1998. I will go on the most ridiculous tangents of all time. I will make the most obscure references of all time, and I will have just the weirdest reactions to the most minuscule things. I love heel Jericho of 1998. He's literally me. That's who I am. I love everything about it. He's hilarious. I love the 1004 holds. I love the conspiracy victim. I love Jericho versus Goldberg. All that stuff was comedy gold, and I'm always a sucker for comedy. You know, in like my theater, like I'm definitely more comfortable with the comedy, and I'm more of a comedic actor just because I understand like comedic timing and I understand all that stuff. And it just that comes naturally to Jericho, and I feel like I don't want to say I've channeled Jericho in my acting because that's not true to an extent, but some comedy spots that I have to do in my shows and during improv exercises, I've kind of channeled a little bit of 1998 Jericho into some of my characters where, it's just completely over the top and completely ridiculous to the point where you can't help but laugh. So Jericho's whole 1998 run, I had to rediscover it for myself because I wasn't watching, obviously, when he was doing it because I was only one solid year of my life. So, I had to rediscover it on my own. But I'm really glad I did because it's some of his best work. And then finally, which movie would you have Jericho replace one of the characters in? It's a very good question, and I thought about it for a bit. And I was having a really hard time thinking about it, but then I thought about one thing. And I don't know if it would have been able to save the movie, but I think it would have made the movie better. I'm going to go with a recent pick. I'm going to go Batman vs. Superman, Dawn of Justice. I'm going to have Jericho replace Jesse Eisenberg as Lex Luthor. Now, maybe it's just me, but wouldn't that have been badass? Nothing against Jesse Eisenberg, but I think he was miscasted as... Take two. No offense to Eisenberg, but I really think he was miscasted as Lex Luthor. But I think, what about Jericho as Lex Luthor? Having that slow, monotonous kind of tone. Like maybe if you brought the Honest Man gimmick a little into the Lex Luthor, wouldn't that have been pretty cool? Maybe, and I also thought about Loki, but I can't betray Tom Hiddleston like that. That guy's my boy. I love Tom Hiddleston. So I think Lex Luthor, Jericho. Wouldn't that have been pretty cool? Maybe it's just me. Maybe, I don't know. I was really having trouble thinking of movies because, all my favorite movies are, great movies that I don't want to see, a non-experienced actor go in, but you know what I mean? But I thought about it, I was just like, Lex Luthor, like, I think Jericho could make a great villain, because he was a great villain in 2008 with that honest man gimmick, and just, Lex Luthor being the kind of like two-faced and, being the businessman by day and the villain by night, I really think Jericho could have played that role pretty well, actually. I think he would have actually done pretty well if they gave him the chance. Not saying that he would have been better than Jesse Eisenberg, but I think it would have been a shot. Would have been worth a shot. And he could have been. So that was a very interesting question. Thank you for that. But yeah, I think Lex Luthor, Jericho. I like the sound of it. I like the look of it. I think it could have been pretty badass. Wrestling Reviewer asks best Chris Jericho WWE match. How could it be anything else? Chris Jericho versus Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 19. The best match in Jericho's career, one of the best matches of Shawn Michaels' career, one of the best matches in WrestleMania history, in my opinion, the greatest WrestleMania of all time. Perfect storm creates the perfect concoction for the greatest match of all time for Chris Jericho, and that match would be his match with HBK at 19. Nothing else, man. I mean, like, you could argue the ladder match with Benoit, ladder match with HBK, or some other match, even the match at the Bash with Mysterio, but to me, just, you can't get any better than that. And he was in the peak of his career. He was, athletically, he was in his prime. And, Shawn Michaels was still delivering great matches. And that was the match that kind of made Shawn Michaels establish himself as someone who's coming back for a second run. So there's so much implication from that match. And just the action itself makes it one of the best. Maritza Medina asked, favorite Jericho title reign? I mean, there's so many good title reigns, but not too many great title reigns from Jericho. But to me, his best title reign is also my favorite, the Cruiserweight Championship reign in WCW. If you want a world title reign, I guess when he won it at Unforgiven and then dropped it at Survivor Series, he was just in the peak of his career as a heel. So I guess that was a very, very good title reign. I wish I could say his Undisputed Championship reign in 01-02, but he was just made to look like such a dumbass in that reign, to the point where I can't really consider it my favorite. But the Cruiserweight Championship reign has a lot of funny moments, a lot of great matches in it, and the heel title reign in 2008, as the world champion, he really kind of came into his own as a heel. And that was kind of the climax of his heel character. So I can really, really appreciate that. Favorite Jericho run? I would have to say his 1999 to 2005 run in WWE. That's just what I grew up on. That's what I've always known. I love the Y2J character. The Y2J character is what made Jericho my favorite wrestler ever. So that has to be my favorite run. I love all the other runs, but to me, that's the one I grew up on. And whatever you grew up on is probably going to be your favorite. Favorite Jericho feud, Shawn Michaels, without a doubt. He was the perfect opponent for Chris Jericho, especially because, and I'm so glad that, they rarely ever did a face. I mean, they had a couple face versus face matches, but I mean, Jericho is the heel and Michaels as the face. What more could you ask for? Shawn Michaels is such a great baby face, and Chris Jericho is such a great heel, especially towards someone like Shawn Michaels, who, Jericho had so much dirt on, and he had so much material to use against Shawn Michaels. It was a great, great feud. Thoughts on his current run? His current run has been probably his best work since 2012. His run in 2013 was fine, and 2014 was eh. But 2016, he really is starting to understand himself now, in terms of, like, he isn't the wrestler he used to be, so now he has to he has to try extra hard to get over with the crowd, because his in-ring work cannot get him over to the same effect that it could when he was younger, because he's not the wrestler he used to be. So all the things he's come up with now, Stupid Idiot and Gift of Jericho, like, those are just things where he just has to be thinking in his car and just like decides, like, hey, I'm gonna do this and see how it works. Maybe that's just something about Jericho that a lot of people don't have nowadays. It's just like they're just so willing to, like, and I mean, I'm sure Jericho isn't as, I shouldn't call out other people, because I'm sure Jericho is not bound to a script or, writers. I'm sure they just let him do what he wants, considering he's a veteran and they have to, keep such an eye on their younger talent. But I feel like if younger talent were able to do what Jericho would do, and that's just, try different stuff. Like in WCW, I mean, I know you don't want to model everything after WCW, considering how that place was run. But like Jericho said when he was in WCW, he just did whatever he wanted. Like, no one cared what he said. So for 30 seconds before every single match, he would just say whatever he wanted, and that got him over. So I think maybe that's something that Jericho could kind of like try and chime into management. Like, maybe just let these guys say whatever they want to say, and then people will start liking them, instead of having all your wrestlers be robots. You know what I mean? So I think his current run has really shown Jericho's strengths. as a non-wrestler. Like, we all know Jericho's a great wrestler, and we know his in-ring work is great and he's capable, but I think this current run is solidifying Jericho as one of the best, like, personalities, even though we've already known he's a great personality and a great talker and a great promo. But Jericho really has been able to morph his character to the point where he's really become something special in these couple months that he's been with the WWE. Attitude Classics asked the following questions: most overrated and underrated Jericho feuds. Off the top of my head, I'm gonna have to think about this for a sec. Overrated feuds. One, even though I have given one of the matches in this feud some praise, I'm gonna say Jericho and Edge is a pretty overrated Jericho feud. Their match at WrestleMania 26 I thought was good, and their cage match I thought was really good as well. But the build-up to the WrestleMania match really wasn't all that great, and it was kind of stupid. It was just Edge constantly repeating spear. He was just like, oh, spear, 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 and Jericho just said spear, spear, spear back. There really wasn't a lot. I mean, they had a good story for that feud. They had the whole tag team thing, but they really kind of didn't use that at all. They kind of just talked about the spear. I really don't understand their thought process going into that feud. But other than that, there's really nothing too special about the Jericho Edge feud. I mean, they had an okay feud in '02. It was really short-lived to be anything really great. But in terms of, like, what people remember most from Jericho Edge is their 2010 feud, because it culminated in a WrestleMania match for the world title. So, of course, people are going to remember that more than their '02 feud. But, Jericho and Edge, they had good chemistry, but I don't think they ever really had a good rivalry, if that makes sense. And another one that I'll say is kind of overrated, even though I don't know if I'd consider this overrated, because I think a lot of people would agree with me, but the Jericho-Bray Wyatt feud, I think I'd find that more disappointing than overrated. It had a lot of potential, and I think a lot of people were excited for it when it first started up, but it really wasn't all that great, nothing too exciting. I mean, the matches were fine, but nothing to really write home about. But still, and I'd also throw in, potentially, John Cena in, like, the late 2000s. Like, his feud with him in '05 was good, but everything else with Cena really wasn't all that great. In terms of underrated Jericho feuds, the one that really pops into my head is Malenko in WCW. Jericho did some of the funniest things he had ever done, and they were so polar opposite. Dean Malenko was just so stone-faced and so stoic and serious, and Jericho was so stupid and fun-loving, and, hair's a mess, and Dean Malenko has the super short hair and everything. So, like, they complemented each other well due to the fact that they were so opposite. And, the Man of 1,004 Holds promo is hilarious, and him... There's another thing Jericho did during that Cruiserweight title run that I never mentioned was he brought that portrait of Dean Malenko down, because, like, Dean Malenko left, quote-unquote, left WCW after he lost to Jericho, and he came down with a portrait of Dean Malenko, and he would just interview it, which I thought was hilarious. So the Malenko feud was really, really great, a lot of good moments from it. And another really, really good feud that Jericho has was with Rob Van Dam. They had, like, a little bit of a rivalry in, like, the early 2000s, like late '01, '02. They had a little bit of a rivalry, and that was a really, really good feud. They always produced great matches. They always had good chemistry. I really am kind of sad they never really explored the depth that they could have gone to. Like, they never really went with Jericho and RVD as a main time program. It was kind of just like a little bit of a rivalry that you could always fall back on when you needed a match for a pay-per-view. But it was a really, really good feud. A lot of people don't remember how great Jericho and RVD were as a unit together in terms of opponents. Your next question, favorite Jericho attires. I've been meaning to make a video of this for a while, the top 5 Jericho attires, and I have, like, the audio file. I just never got to editing the video, but I guess I'll do it now. Now's a good time as any. So, favorite Jericho attires, I have 5. One, I'm going to mention this quickly about Jericho's attire. I infinitely prefer him wearing long tights than the trunks. The thing about trunks with Jericho is the trunks, and I don't mean this as in I'm a size mark. I don't mean it like this at all. But the trunks made him look, I don't want to say shorter, but they made him look more compact, if that makes sense. And, like, think about it this way. Jericho, in his later years when he was wearing the trunks, his physique was not as defined as it was when he was younger, which is expected. But when it was that, like, he didn't look as muscular, he didn't look as, like, in shape when he was wearing the trunks, when his body, he was still in shape, like, he was still muscular, he still had abs and everything, and he was more muscular than I'll ever be. But, when Jericho was younger, of course, he had, like, a more leaner, more fit body and physique, and the tights really kind of complemented him well because he's already like, what, 5'11", 6 feet tall. So they kind of made him look, I don't want to say bigger, but made him look more, you know, full, if that, for lack of a better word. So I kind of prefer him wearing the tights to the trunks. The trunks still look fine. I don't really care at the end of the day, because I'm not a size mark, so it doesn't really bother me to a huge degree. But if I had to pick one, I'd say he should have stayed in the tights. But I understand why he switched to the trunks. It was a good idea, you know, completely reinvent his character. But anyway, top 5 Jericho attires. Number 5 would be the pink and black tights he would wear in O2. Number 4, I'll have the pictures of all these on the screen just so all of you can see what I'm referencing. Number 4 would be an attire he wore in 2003. He had like 2 pairs of tights that were pretty much identical, just with different color palettes. He had one that was like blue and silver in this sort of design, but there was one that was like more like a peach pink color that I thought was kind of cooler looking. And then number 3, it was tights he debuted in 2004. They were all red, and they had his pose with like, you know, these like stardust trails flying out on the side with Jericho written along the waist. He had them in different colors, but I really like the red one, so that comes in at number 3. Number 2 is his attire at WrestleMania 19 with, you know, the light blue pants with his pose and like that spider web out of gold. That's like, you know, the spider web of gold design on the back. That's what it always looked like to me. Number 1 would be his tights at WrestleMania 20. It's the same design as the tights I put in at number 3, but I really like the color scheme here. The light blue, like the powdered blue, and the Stardust Trail is more of like a black and white, and his pose is purple, and the Jericho lettering is in purple. That was always my favorite attire. I always thought that looked the coolest. I always liked when he wore those, and I always liked how Jericho mixed up his attire. That's something you don't really see a lot nowadays. People always wear the same thing, and it kind of gets repetitive and boring. I mean, the only person who I can think off the top of my head that kind of changes their attire is Dolph Ziggler. I mean, that's really the only person who I'm like thinking off the top of my head. Like, you could talk about Seth Rollins, how he like his gear has changed, but like he just goes through periods where he wears a different gear like every single day. You know what I mean? But with Dolph, like he actually wears different tights. But I mean, it can be fun. Like that's something like that is something you notice, something that can be fun, and you know that's something that's kind of lost nowadays in wrestling. But that was one of the reasons why I like Jericho so much. I just kind of liked his attire. You know, he looked cool. But yeah, the 2004 gear at WrestleMania 20, the light blue ones were really, really awesome. Those were definitely my favorite. Favorite HBK Y2J match? Man, WrestleMania 19. What more can you say? Classic match. Love it to death. I mean, I love all the HBK Jericho matches, but WrestleMania 19 has got to be the best. Best Jericho book is a good question. I've read all 3, and I enjoy all 3, but I will say Undisputed is my favorite, mainly because that covers a majority of the career of Jericho that I followed as a kid. You know, like the 1999 to 2005, that was the bulk of the book and the main focus in terms of wrestling for that book, and I really enjoyed reading about that. I enjoyed reading about his heat coming into WWE when he came in from WCW. So a lot of interesting stuff, a lot of funny stories in that book. So that would definitely be my favorite one. I like all 3, but Undisputed is definitely my favorite one. How long would you expect Jericho and Edge to have held the tag team titles if not for Edge's injury in 2009? I'd expect them to hold the title for a very, very long time. I mean, the tag team division in late 2009 like sucked. You know, there really wasn't anything for them to do. But I really think they could have brought legitimacy back to that division, especially since, you know, they had unified the tag team titles. The brand's extension was kind of fading away, and they could have gone on both shows and they could have dominated. They could have really been a serious tag team and a tag team that people really enjoyed watching and hate, like, you know, kind of loved to hate. You know, that was kind of Jericho and Edge's goal as heels. They've always talked about that. It's just they wanted to have no redeeming qualities, and I think that could have been very, very apparent with this tag team. They could have gone really, really far, and I think they could have been probably tag team champs maybe until WrestleMania 26 the next year. And maybe they could have even done a champion versus champion match, like a tag team champion versus tag team champion match at WrestleMania 26 with, you know, the same kind of feud built in. But I really think they could have held the titles till WrestleMania or around that time. Mr. Beetle 890 asked the following questions. Most overrated Jericho match. This one was pretty hard for me considering, like, when I thought about it for a second, I was just like, there's not too many overrated Jericho matches that I can think of. When I was younger, I used to think that the Royal Rumble match with Rock was overrated, but I've recently watched that match again, and I like it a lot more than I did when I was younger. But there's one match, to me, from Jericho that the older I've gotten, the less and less I like it, And this pains me to admit because I used to say this was one of the best ladder matches in history. But Jericho and Christian at Unforgiven 2004, I used to really, really, really love this match. Like when I was when I was really, really young, this is like my favorite match. I watched it all the time. And, I would always put this in the top ladder matches of all time, next to Shawn and Razor, and next to Jericho and Benoit, and next to the Triangle ladder match at WrestleMania. I'd be like, this match deserves to be on the list because it's so great. The older and older I've gotten, and the more I watched it, the less and less I like it. I'd say if I had to give a rating, maybe 3.25, 3.5, maybe. I used to say 4.5, but no fucking way it's that much. 3.5. I mean, again, if you like this match, I'm not hating on you or anything. This is just my opinion. I think my problem with this match is at one point it just seemed like it was just spot to spot to spot to spot. And I know matches are like that, like the TLC matches are like that, but like there's something, I don't know, it seemed like those matches were popcorn style, where it was just like there was just non-stop action. Here it was like big spot, sell, big spot, sell. Like I feel like the match did not flow very well. It just seemed like a bunch of like, it just seemed like someone just took a bunch of different ladder spots and just kind of threw them together in a montage. And that's the match you got here. And I mean, Jericho and Christian beat the hell out of each other. I mean, I know Jericho, like, a ladder, like, went, like, right up his ass. Like, there was, like, a moment where he fell on a ladder and he landed, like, ass first. I do remember that. And Jericho talked about it in his book. But, and I feel bad that they took so many brutal bumps, but, like, this match really isn't all that great. It's not that great of a ladder match. And I think a lot of people, put it as the best Jericho-Christian match, which, in my opinion, is not true. I would put the WrestleMania match over this definitely. Maybe even the Backlash match. I kind of like that match too. That's a pretty underrated Jericho match with Jericho and Christian. Jericho versus Christian and Trish is what I'm referencing. But I really like, the more and more I watch it, the less and less I like it. And it's okay. I mean, again, like 3.25, 3.5 maybe. But it also just went really, really long. It was like 23 minutes. It could have been 15, 16. Did not have to be all that long. And, just a lot of unnecessary bumps, a lot of just time wasted on, like, trying to set up all these contrived spots and everything. It was not like Shawn and Razor or Jericho and Benoit, where it was, like, a match with a ladder. This seemed to be just, like, a bunch of ladder spots. You know what I mean? So, definitely not my favorite Jericho match, and one that I've grown to kind of dislike over the years. Thoughts on his matches with RVD, a very underrated opponent for Jericho. They always had great matches. I think my favorite match with them has probably got to be the King of the Ring match, is probably my most favorite. That's probably the best match they had. But so many great, and their match on Raw in 2013 was really, really good. They had one of the best matches in Raw history. But yeah, no, they always had great matches together, and they always had great chemistry, and they never really, like, decided to look into the feud. There was just always kind of just a little bit of a rivalry they kept in their back pocket, but a very, very good, like, feud between the two could have definitely been in the making. They definitely could have explored more into this, and they could have had great matches, and they could have had great main event matches for titles, because Jericho was over as a heel. RVD was one of the most over guys on the roster in, like, late 2001, when Jericho was starting to become the top heel, or one of the top heels, I should say. He was never really the top heel, but really, really, they could have done something with RVD and Jericho. They always had great matches. And how much longer do you see Jericho wrestling, and when do you think he will retire? In terms of him wrestling, I'm expecting him to retire in the next 2-3 years, probably. I think 3 is probably even too much. I'd say 1 to 2 years. I think maybe 2017, 2018 is when Jericho will officially hang it up. But in terms of fully retiring from wrestling, I don't know. He could definitely do some non-wrestling roles in WWE. He could be a fantastic manager, or hell, they could even do something with him, like they could have him have like a permanent highlight reel on the network, you know what I mean? Kind of like how like Corey Graves and Renee Young have their shows. Jericho could definitely have his show. He could have like his own highlight reel. It's the highlight reel with Chris Jericho. Like there's Unfiltered with Renee Young, and what's that other, Culture Shock? I think that's Corey Graves' show. They could do something like that with Jericho on the network, and I think he has a lot of different things he could do. He could be a general manager. He could be a manager of a wrestler, like a valet. Definitely a lot of different options for him. I definitely think he can do a lot more with WWE once he's done wrestling. Lazer Shark asks, who is your dream rival for Y2J? There's a ton. There's a lot of wrestlers I'd like to see Jericho feud with, like in the prime of his career or during a certain time period. Like I would have loved to seen like a 2000, 2001 Jericho feud with like a Shinsuke Nakamura, AJ Styles, Seth Rollins, like guys like that. But one that I really think would have been cool to see is maybe a 2008, 2009 Jericho feud with like a 1999, 1998 Sting. Like when Sting's like a baby face, when he's, he has like the black and white face paint, but he's not as, mysterious. He's more open. I think that would have been a really cool rivalry. Mostly due to the fact that I think Jericho could have really used, like, again, like kind of like what I mentioned with that potential Undertaker feud. I think Jericho could have used that, honest man gimmick to question Sting's, change in persona. Bring up Sting's past. Like you were once the surfer Sting with the blonde hair, the flat top, the colorful face paint, and then you retreated to the shadows. Why would you do that, Sting? Why would you go and become this mysterious figure? Why did you think you had to be the hero for everyone? Why were you a martyr? Like really question. I think that's like a really underrated aspect of Jericho's character that I really don't think they capitalized on a lot. Was him like as the honest man asking the hard questions. He did it with HBK and he did it with Mysterio. That's why I love those rivalries so much. He asked Shawn Michaels, like, why are you a hypocrite? Why do people cheer for someone who lies to them? Like stuff like that. And then with Ray, like, why do you wear a mask? What are you hiding? Like it really makes fans question these wrestlers who, don't tell them the whole truth, if you know what I mean. And like, we can say Sting retreated to the shadows because everyone turned his back on him, but why did he feel compelled to do that? Why did he need to change himself because other people? Like, I really feel like we could have dived in and like figured out what was going through Sting's mind. Why he had to do what he did when everyone else wouldn't believe in him. Couldn't he have just stick to what he knew? So I think like there's a lot of potential for that. The matches would have been great too. Sting and Jericho, they would have been older in age, so maybe they wouldn't have been the greatest matches in the world, but they would have been fun. And I mean, I love Sting and I love Jericho, two of my favorite wrestlers. And, we never got a match between the two of them, as far as I know. And like, I really think it would have been nice. Like, it would have been really cool. And I think Jericho as, like the rambunctious heel or rambunctious face of like 2000, 2001 could like make fun of Sting's face paint and like make fun of his transformation. Like that would have been fine too. But I think a more philosophical, more deep rooted, questioning type of feud with Jericho just constantly being under Sting's skin and having him just come out with the truth of why he had to retreat to the shadows, why he became the Crow Sting. That really would have been a cool feud, and I think that would have been something that would have been money. It would have been awesome, but unfortunately, again, like it was just timing never really matched up with that. I mean, if Sting had stayed with WWE, if he had signed in '01, we could have done something like that. Maybe even wait a couple years, and if he'd come to the company in 2011, to face Taker at WrestleMania 27, which was like the rumor, Jericho could have come back in 2012 and done something like that. But coulda, woulda, shoulda. Sting did his thing, Jericho did his thing, and we're just left with a dream feud, which I think would have been really cool. And finally, Prince of Strong Style V2. Let's get right into your questions. During his break from 2005 to 2007, if he was allowed one match with ROH talent around this time, who would you have him face and where? Example, Jericho and Nigel McGuinness at Death Before Dishonor 5. That's a good one. That's definitely a good one. I was thinking about this, and my first instinct was to say, oh, Jericho and Punk, or Jericho and Bryan in like 2005, 2007, although I don't know if he would have caught Punk in time. I have to think about that for a second. I'm not 100% sure on my ROH timeline, but whatever. Punk's not my answer, so it doesn't even matter anyway. But I thought about it for a second. I'm like, well, I got Punk matches in WWE, and while Jericho and Bryan never really had like a classic, they did have that really really fun match on NXT. So I don't really need, and as much as I'd love to see a Jericho versus 2005 Jericho versus 2005 Bryan Danielson, I had my fix. So I thought, like, who's a good opponent Jericho could have never faced? Nigel McGuinness was a good one, but I thought about it, and what if this happened? And I don't want to mess with the match because the match at Final Battle '05 was really good between Low Ki and Kenta. But what if Kenta made his ROH debut against Chris Jericho? I think that would have been a fucking awesome match. And I mean, we're probably never going to see Hideo Itami versus Chris Jericho just because of, how much Hideo is probably going to have to stay in NXT. Jericho's probably going to stay on the main roster. He might not go back and do that NXT match like he did with Bray Wyatt. I really think Jericho versus Kenta would have been really, really awesome in Kenta's ROH debut. Name any underrated Jericho matches from any incarnation or gimmick or promotion. Example, Jericho and Storm versus Heavenly Bodies. Okay, that's a good example right there. That's a good answer. Jericho and Storm versus Heavenly Bodies. Very, very good tag team match. Jericho got a really bad cut in this match. He was bleeding a lot, but this is a very, very fun match. That six-man tag from Clash of the Champions 34 is another great underrated Jericho match. In terms of his WWE run, his matches with X-Pac in 2000 were very, very good. His match with Kurt Angle at No Way Out 2000 is very, very good. Trying to think of more. Jericho and Bray Wyatt on NXT in 2013 was a very, very cool match. He had a good match with Cody Rhodes on SmackDown in 2013. That was really, really good. I'm trying to think of more. Jericho and Orton at Night of Champions is really brushed under the rug. That was an awesome match. As I mentioned before, probably the most underrated match of Jericho's career, Jericho and Christian at WrestleMania 20. It just doesn't get talked about enough. People don't realize how great of a match that actually was. So, I think more off the top of my head, those are pretty much the ones that come to my mind. I think as a match, Jericho and Triple H on Raw, a lot of people don't realize how good that match was. They just kind of remember the angle afterwards, and rightfully so. That was the most memorable part of the match. But the actual match itself was really, really, really good. He also had a good match with Ultimo Dragon in Wrestling and Romance. It's not the one that's included on his DVD. He had another one with Ultimo Dragon. I can't remember the exact date of it off the top of my head, but I'm sure if you look it up, you'll find it, because it's the one that's not on his DVD. And that match, it's shorter. It's shorter than that match. It's not as good as that match on his DVD, but it's still really, really good. And not a lot of people talk about it, and rightfully so. Not a lot of people know about it. And aside from that, the 8-man tags from Wrestling and Romance and New Japan are also really, really good matches that don't get mentioned often. What would you have done for Jericho at WrestleMania 18 if he didn't win and defend the Undisputed Championship? Do you also believe that reign delivered, or did it feel underwhelming? Well, I always think about it, and I thought, if Jericho wasn't going to defend the title, why not have him go against Rob Van Dam at WrestleMania 18? They were building towards that. They always had great matches. Why not? I mentioned 5 million times already how they never made Jericho and RVD a solid feud. So why not dive into that? And why not, make that a WrestleMania match? Because RVD was over as hell. And what did he do at this WrestleMania? He fought in the opener against Regal in like 6 minutes to win the Intercontinental Championship. Or did he retain? I can't remember. God, did he retain or win that Intercontinental title? I believe he won it. He definitely won it. I'm pretty sure. Whatever. Point is, Jericho and RVD could have had a great WrestleMania match, and in terms of Jericho's title reign feeling underwhelming, it definitely felt underwhelming, because he was made to look like a complete loser. And I mean, he's a heel, and he was kind of a comedic heel, so it made sense, but like, in this feud with Triple H, like, it was him and Triple H versus Stephanie. That was the real WrestleMania match. Jericho was just kind of like the male embodiment of Stephanie McMahon in terms of like the match. Like the real WrestleMania match was Triple H versus Stephanie. Jericho just happened to be there. So he definitely did not feel important in his feud with Triple H going into WrestleMania 18. Not to mention he also got overshadowed by Rock and Austin. Which submission is better / more effective, Lazer Jericho or the Lion Tamer? Now, as a move, the Lion Tamer definitely looks more vicious, and it's more effective, and it looks more painful and everything. But that being said, the Walls of Jericho is a better professional wrestling move, and let me explain why. You can play around with the Walls of Jericho more. You can add those drama-filled moments when someone's crawling towards the rope and reaching out, and Jericho brings them back into the middle of the ring. With the Lion Tamer, there's not so much movement. It's not very mobile. Jericho puts his knee in the guy's back, and there's no place for them to go. I think something Jericho could have done, and Jericho mentioned this when he came to WWE, that guys like Triple H, Kane, Undertaker, Edge, and like guys like those who were just too big for the submission move, because he was always wrestling cruiserweights who were smaller. So he could bend them like that in different ways. So he had to change his move to counteract the bigger opponents he was facing. But something I think he could have done, which he kind of did in his early run, but he kind of shied away from it, was he put in like the traditional Boston Crab, and then when he brought them back to the ring, he would cinch it in tighter by elevating it more. And he did kind of have a hybrid of the Lion Tamer and Walls of Jericho in like 2001. Like, he had the elevated Boston crab. That was basically the move. He didn't sit down on him like he does now for the walls, but he didn't use his knee as much as he did in the Lion Tamer. You go back and watch his match with Rhino at SummerSlam '01 and watch the ending of that match. He sinks in like this hybrid Walls of Jericho that I'm referring to. But yeah, so I would say the Walls of Jericho is definitely a more effective move as a professional wrestling hold. But if you want straight up pain, the Lion Tamer looks more vicious, yeah. But in order to play around with drama and having to counteract for your opponent's size, the Walls of Jericho is just a better move. It also has a better name. I like the Walls of Jericho better than Lion Tamer, even though both of them are great. Do you think Jericho should have pulled out of the match with Storm against the Heavenly Bodies at Smoky Mountain Night of Legends '94 due to his broken arm? I mean, yeah. I mean, this is kind of like a no-brainer. Like, he should have. I guess in the long run, it didn't hurt him that much because I don't know of Jericho having arm complications or anything. But, I mean, he should have. It was just a precautionary thing. Safety first. You should always pull out of a match. I heard the story. I think Jim Cornette told the story where, like, Jericho literally, like, was going out to just practice backflips or something in the ring. And then, like, someone called him and was like, all right, Jericho's going to the hospital. He might have broken his arm. And then he had the match the following night. So, like, it was really definitely crazy for Jericho to do that. But, again, I bet he was young. He just wanted to have the match. He probably wasn't thinking straight. So he did it anyway. So I can't, like, say, you know, he wasn't thinking. Well, he wasn't. But still. At the end of the day, I can't complain about it too much because I think in the long run, it hasn't hurt him that much. I don't think there's anything wrong with his body now. And he hasn't gotten injured since, so I think he's pretty much good. What are some guys that were in the company at the same time he was and you wish had wrestled, i.e. Goldberg in '98, RVD '96, Val Venus 2000, Guerrero '05? Think about this all the top of my head. Pretty much all those. Maybe except for Val Venus. I didn't really have any desire to see Jericho wrestle Val Venus in 2000. Guerrero in '05, that was just more of not being on the same show, which kind of sucks. Goldberg in '98, I think the only reason I'd want him to face Goldberg in '98 was for the payoff for that Jericho-Goldberg storyline. RVD '96, I can understand that in ECW, but, you know, Jericho I thought had a good ECW run regardless. One that really pops into my head was 2013. For WrestleMania season, you know, Jericho was wrestling Fandango. I thought the perfect match for Jericho would have been Jericho versus Cesaro. I thought that would have been a really, really awesome match, and one definitely worth checking out. You know, I think that would have been, because Cesaro was the U.S. champion at the time of WrestleMania 29, and I thought he was going to wrestle Sin Cara, but Sin Cara got injured, and they just scrapped the match entirely, which I thought was stupid, and I thought they could have had, Jericho and Cesaro could have had a great match, and I thought they had a match on the Go Home Raw for WrestleMania 29. And I thought that could have been your WrestleMania match. I mean, Cesaro wasn't as over as he was, and as he would be the following year, but he definitely could have done something well. In 2003, 2004, I would have loved him to face The Undertaker. I would say maybe like 2002, 2003, a Jericho-Brock Lesnar match would have been really, really cool. So guys like that, you know, but I think the biggest one for me would have been Cesaro at WrestleMania 29. I think that was the best possible match you could have had for Jericho. If Jericho wrestled in any Japan promotion between 1993 and 1996, which guys would you have loved for him to face? Top one for me is Misawa. I mean, that's kind of cheating, isn't it, right? Misawa is like one of the greatest wrestlers of all time, so sure, yeah, you gotta have Jericho and Misawa because he's one of the best wrestlers of all time. In terms of other wrestlers, I'd have to think maybe Kenta Kobashi. I think they could have had a really, really good... I mean, you gotta just think of the greatest Japanese wrestlers of that particular time frame. So I'd have to agree with you with Misawa, and I think Kenta Kobashi, you know, Misawa's greatest rival or so, could have definitely been great opponents for Jericho. But again, you know, that was just kind of just the time frame. You know, that definitely wouldn't have been able to happen. If Ray wasn't injured, do you think the feud with Jericho and Ray would have had more credibility and would have been more of a resume to Jericho's 1998 run? I mean, yeah, sure. I mean, the feud had to be cut short and everything. I mean, it did give us the beautiful sight of Jericho carrying around Rey Mysterio's knee brace, which was a classic moment. But, I mean, I did enjoy what little we had of that. But, yeah, if we definitely could have had more of that, that would have been awesome. But, you know, the silver lining in that is it was able to kickstart Jericho and Malenko's feud earlier. So, you know, I definitely think maybe if they had more time and more effort and if Ray was healthy, then, yeah, they definitely could have had a better feud. And it would have been better just because... You know, it just would have been more great matches for Jericho to have. But at the end of the day, they more than made up for it with their feud in 2009. So I'm not too sore about it. How is it that Jericho can still have very good levels today, matching up with guys like AJ Styles? You kind of answered your own question with your question. AJ Styles, man, he's one of the best wrestlers of all time, and he can pull out a great match with about anyone. Jericho, as we know, is not who he used to be in the ring. And Jericho has proven that, he can still have great matches when he's in there with guys who are just like him and, have the similar style with him. And guys like AJ Styles can have a great match with anyone. And, a guy like Daniel Bryan and CM Punk, they had great matches with Jericho despite his older age because they were so great. And Jericho was still able to help younger stars like Bray Wyatt. He gave Bray Wyatt some of his best matches. I'm talking about the NXT match, not the two main roster matches. Those were okay. But the NXT match was really, really good because he's able to he has a different, unique style. He knows how to stay over. He knows what the crowd wants to see. His match with Neville's a very good example. He's able to... He also holds in... He doesn't blow his load in his matches. He holds in a lot of his repertoire, and he breaks it out, so when he does break out a certain move that we don't see him hit very often, it's exciting. And the thing about Jericho is he's not on TV every week. He takes hiatuses, he takes time off, and there's a time where we can refresh on Jericho. I mean, if Jericho was wrestling nonstop from 2012 to 2016, I guarantee you I and a lot of other people would be tired of him. But because he sporadically shows up, and there are certain times where he's wrestling for a couple months straight, and then maybe takes a year off, or 6 months off or something, he's able to kind of rejuvenate, and people are more open to his matches, and he can have more entertaining matches. Name your top 5 Jericho matches from each run. Pre-WWF, 1993 to 1999, the Y2J run, 1999 to 2005, and his comeback run, 07 to the current day. This is just my opinion, what I think are the best matches. Okay, number 5, pre-WWF run, number 5 would be Jericho and Malenko at Uncensored, 1998. Number 4 would be Jericho versus Pitbull number 2 versus Shane Douglas versus Too Cold Scorpio at ECW Heatwave, 1996. And then we have Jericho and Guerrero at number 3 from Fall Brawl, 1997. Number 2 would be Jericho and Guerrera from Super Brawl 8. And number 1 would be Jericho and Benoit from the Super J Cup, 1995. In terms of his WWF run from 1999 to 2005. Number 5 would be Jericho and The Rock from No Mercy 2001. Number 4 would be Jericho and Benoit versus Steve Austin and Triple H. Number 3 would be Jericho and Triple H Last Man Standing match at Fully Loaded 2000. Number 2 would be Jericho and Benoit, Royal Rumble 2001. And number 1 would be Chris Jericho versus Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 19. In terms of comeback matches, number 5 would be CM Punk versus Chris Jericho at Extreme Rules 2012. Number 4 would be Chris Jericho versus CM Punk at Payback 2013. Number 3 would be Chris Jericho versus CM Punk at WrestleMania 28. Number 2 would be Chris Jericho versus Shawn Michaels in the ladder match from No Mercy. And number 1 would be Chris Jericho versus Rey Mysterio at The Bash 2009. Now everyone, take a deep breath. We're finished. So thank you to everyone who sent in questions. I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you guys went through the entirety of this. God, I will commend anyone who sat through this entire thing. I definitely would not be able to. So thank you for everyone who sent in questions. I will see all of you later with more stuff, more shit, I don't even care, man. I need to take a nap after all this talking. I will see all of you later. Have a great day, and stay wonderful.